The dust rises before the army can see the city. It hangs over the road in pale curtains, stirred by thousands of feet, hooves, wheels, and baggage animals moving north through the Syrian heat. Somewhere ahead, beyond the green ribbon of the Orontes and the low silhouette of Kadesh, an enemy king is waiting. Ramesses II does not yet know how close that enemy is. He believes the Hittite host remains far to the north, perhaps near Aleppo, still gathering strength or retreating from the threat of Egypt's advance. His own army stretches behind him in separate divisions, strung out over miles of road. The pharaoh rides near the front with the division of Amun, confident enough to move quickly, confident enough to let distance open between one body of troops and the next. The danger is already present, but it is still invisible. It lies not in the number of men Ramesses commands, nor in the brilliance of his chariots, nor even in the walls of Kadesh. It lies in what he thinks he knows. The landscape encourages certainty. Kadesh sits in a region that looks like a natural prize, a fortified stronghold near the upper Orontes, close to routes that connect the interior of Syria with the Mediterranean coast and the kingdoms beyond. Approaching from the south, the Egyptian army moves through country that is dry, broken, and open in places, yet crossed by watercourses and patches of cultivation. The city itself occupies a defensible position, often identified with Tel Nebi Mend, where the mound rises beside the river and commands movement through the valley. To an advancing army, the ground offers both opportunity and concealment. Hills, river bends, settlements, and distance can hide a force until it is almost too late. The Egyptians do not possess a modern map, a satellite view, or a reliable stream of intelligence. They depend on scouts, local informants, captured travelers, and the reports of men whose loyalties may be uncertain. A campaign of this scale is therefore not only a contest of weapons, it is a contest over information, and on this morning the Hittites are winning that contest. Ramesses is still early in his reign, young enough to be ambitious and experienced enough to believe that ambition can be made real by speed and force. He has come north to restore Egyptian authority in a region where loyalty changes with pressure, where small kingdoms balance between greater powers, and where the city of Kadesh has become more than a fortress. It is a symbol of who commands Syria, yet none of that larger struggle is visible in the immediate scene. What is visible is a royal army in motion standards rising above columns of infantry, shield-bearers moving beside chariots, officers maintaining order, scribes recording supplies, servants and specialists keeping the enormous machine alive. The divisions bear the names of gods Amun, Re, Ptah, and Set, and each is intended to function as a major military formation with its own infantry and chariot arm. In theory, this gives the army depth and flexibility. In practice, separated formations can be defeated one at a time. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because what unfolds at Kadesh is not simply a tale of courage under pressure. It is also a study in how a military crisis becomes a royal legend, how survival becomes triumph, and how stone can speak more loudly than the battlefield itself. Ahead of Ramesses, men have already been placed in his path. Later Egyptian accounts describe 2 Shasu travelers brought before the pharaoh and questioned about the position of the Hittite king, Muwatalli II. They report that the enemy is far away. Their information fits what Ramesses is prepared to believe, and that is precisely why it is so effective. Whether these men were carefully planted agents, coerced informants, or figures later shaped by Egyptian storytelling remains debated. The evidence survives only through texts composed under Ramesses' authority, texts designed not merely to record but to explain, justify, and magnify. Still, the central fact is difficult to escape. The Egyptian high command advances under a false impression of the enemy's location. On the far side of Kadesh, hidden from Egyptian sight, Muwatalli has assembled a coalition drawn from across the Hittite sphere. Later sources speak of troops and chariots contributed by allied and subject rulers, a gathering of power large enough to challenge Egypt directly. The exact numbers remain uncertain, and ancient military figures are rarely simple counts. But what survives in the record suggests a formidable force, including a very large chariot arm positioned to strike at the moment of greatest Egyptian vulnerability. The Hittite chariot is heavier than the typical Egyptian vehicle, built to carry more men and deliver a violent shock against exposed formations. It does not need to defeat the entire Egyptian army at once. It only needs to break the part of that army caught in motion and drive the confusion forward. Ramesses continues north. His leading troops move toward the river crossing and the ground near Kadesh, while the other divisions follow at intervals. The column is not disorderly, but it is extended, and extension creates weakness. Messages take time to travel. Dust obscures visibility. The road compresses movement. A unit at the rear may know almost nothing of what is happening near the front. The Pharaoh's confidence, later presented as heroic isolation, begins here as an operational risk. He is too far forward with too little confirmed intelligence, and his army is not yet concentrated. The Egyptian version of events will later make this vulnerability essential to the legend. Ramesses must be separated from support so that his courage can become absolute. His officers must fail so that his strength can appear singular. The enemy must surround him so that divine favor can be revealed in the most dramatic possible form. Yet beneath that crafted structure lies a real and dangerous sequence. A king advances. An enemy conceals itself. Intelligence fails, and an army arrives in pieces. By the time Ramesses reaches the vicinity of Kadesh, the trap is nearly complete. The city stands ahead, apparently quiet. The Hittite king remains unseen. Egyptian standards move into position near the western side of the river, and the division of Amun begins to establish a camp. Farther south, the division of Re is still on the road, followed at greater distance by Ptah and Set. No trumpet announces the mistake. No messenger arrives with a full picture of the danger. There is only heat, movement, fatigue, and the deceptive stillness of a battlefield that has not yet revealed itself. Somewhere beyond the city, chariot teams wait with horses harnessed and crews ready. The silence between armies is about to end, but for the moment Ramesses stands at the center of a victory that has not happened, inside a defeat that has not yet begun. That stillness exists only because two empires have spent generations pushing toward the same frontier. Long before Ramesses sees the walls of Kadesh, Egyptian kings and Hittite rulers have learned that northern Syria is too valuable to ignore and too difficult to hold securely. The region is not an empty corridor between greater powers. It is a crowded political landscape of fortified cities, farming districts, caravan routes, ports, river valleys, and small kingdoms whose rulers survive by judging which distant court is strongest at any given moment. Egypt reaches north from the Nile Valley. Hatti reaches south from Anatolia. Between them lies a belt of territory where loyalty is rarely permanent, and where a city such as Kadesh can become the hinge of imperial strategy. Egypt's interest in the region goes back centuries. During the 18th dynasty, pharaohs campaigned into the Levant to secure trade, tribute, prestige, and protection against rival powers. Thutmose III pushes Egyptian influence deep into Syria, and later kings inherit a network of vassals expected to send goods, troops, and declarations of loyalty southward. Egyptian officials and garrisons do not occupy every settlement directly. Much of the system depends on local rulers who remain in place, govern their own populations, and acknowledge the pharaoh when circumstances require it. This arrangement can be efficient, but it is also fragile. Distance weakens supervision. Succession disputes change alliances. A ruler who praises Egypt in one season may seek Hittite protection in the next. Kadesh matters because it stands close to the upper Orontes, near routes that connect inland Syria with the Mediterranean coast and the lands farther north. Control of the city helps shape movement through a broad strategic zone. Armies can pass through it. Messengers can cross it. Trade can be protected, taxed, or interrupted around it. The fertile valley nearby supports settlement and supplies, while the city's elevated mound and river setting give it defensive value. Yet Kadesh is not important merely because of walls and geography. Its political meaning grows over time. To Egypt, it becomes a measure of whether northern influence still survives. To the Hittites, it forms part of a southern defensive network protecting allied states and the approaches to their own sphere. The rivalry sharpens during the reign of Seti I, Ramesses' father. Seti campaigns in Syria and confronts the instability left by earlier decades. When Egyptian power had weakened and Hittite influence expanded, reliefs from his reign celebrate victories in the north and present the king as a restorer of order. He appears to regain control over Kadesh, at least temporarily, though the exact duration and nature of that control remain uncertain. What survives in the record suggests that Egypt could strike into the region and compel submission, but not necessarily maintain unchallenged authority once the royal army withdrew. A city might open its gates to the pharaoh, and later return to the Hittite orbit when the balance of force shifted again. This is the political inheritance Ramesses receives. He does not march toward Kadesh as an explorer encountering an unknown enemy. He enters an old dispute whose victories have repeatedly proved temporary. The struggle is often described as a contest between Egypt and Hatti, but the frontier is shaped just as much by the decisions of smaller kingdoms. Amaru, lying closer to the Mediterranean coast, becomes especially important. Its rulers possess territory that links inland routes with the sea, and their allegiance can alter the strategic balance. When Amuru shifts toward Egypt, the Hittites cannot treat the change as a minor diplomatic insult. It threatens the cohesion of their southern sphere and invites further Egyptian expansion. For Ramesses, reclaiming influence in the north is therefore both practical and symbolic. A pharaoh is expected to maintain order beyond Egypt's borders, defeat rebellion, protect dependent territories, and demonstrate that foreign rulers recognize his superiority. These expectations are expressed through a royal language in which the king stands at the center of universal order. Real diplomacy is far more complicated. Egyptian envoys negotiate, gifts move between courts, vassals bargain for protection, and military campaigns are constrained by weather, distance, food, horses, and the willingness of allies to remain loyal. Yet royal presentation compresses this difficult world into a simpler image. The pharaoh advances, enemies submit, and order returns. The Hittite king Muwatalli II faces his own pressures. Hatti is a powerful state, but its strength depends on maintaining alliances across a wide and sometimes unstable territory. The empire's centre lies in Anatolia, while its influence extends through northern Syria by means of royal family members, treaties, subordinate kings, and military obligations. Muwatalli cannot allow Egypt to peel away important allies without response. If Amiru can defect safely, other rulers may conclude that Hittite protection is weakening. Kadesh therefore becomes part of a larger test. The issue is not simply who holds one city, but whether the network of loyalty surrounding that city will continue to obey Hatti. The diplomatic language of the age reveals a world in which great kings claim equality with one another, even while competing aggressively through proxies and frontier campaigns. Egypt, Hatti, Babylonia, Assyria, and other major courts exchange gifts and messages, address one another with carefully calibrated status, arrange marriages, and complain when the gold, horses, or princesses sent by a rival seem inadequate. Beneath the courtesy lies constant calculation. A royal marriage may stabilize relations, a delayed gift may signal distrust, a vassal's appeal for help may expose a frontier about to collapse. War does not replace diplomacy. It grows out of it and often continues alongside it. This makes the road to Kadesh less like a sudden collision and more like the tightening of a long knot. Ramesses' campaign in his 5th regnal year follows earlier operations and renewed Egyptian involvement in the region. Muwatalli responds not with the token defense but with a large coalition designed to stop the Egyptian advance decisively. Each ruler brings not only his own troops, but the political expectations of allies watching from every direction. A clear Egyptian victory could pull more Syrian states southward into Ramesses' orbit. A Hittite victory could restore discipline across the frontier and expose the limits of Egyptian reach. The ordinary people living between these powers have little control over the imperial contest. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and local officials continue their lives beneath changing banners. A city's ruler may declare loyalty to one empire, but the population must still produce grain, maintain walls, support passing soldiers, and endure the uncertainties of mobilization. Armies consume enormous quantities of food and water. Horses require fodder. Roads deteriorate beneath wheels. The movement of a royal campaign alters the countryside before battle begins. Even a force claiming to restore order can place heavy demands on the communities it crosses. Kadesh stands at the center of this pressure because it is both a real place and an imperial idea. Its walls contain households, workshops, storehouses, temples, and officials. But to distant courts it represents control over a region that neither side can afford to abandon. That difference matters. Empires often fight over places partly because of what those places become in royal imagination. A fortress may be strategically useful, yet its symbolic value can grow far beyond its immediate military importance. Once kings have publicly claimed a city, losing it becomes harder to accept. Ramesses is therefore marching not only against Muwatalli's army, but against the accumulated memory of earlier campaigns, lost influence, disputed treaties, and shifting loyalties. The road behind him stretches south toward Egypt, where victory will be expected and failure will have to be explained. The ground ahead leads toward a city whose possession has changed before and may change again. Between those two realities lies the battlefield. The trap near Kadesh is shaped by this older struggle. Muwatalli hides because he understands that a straightforward defense may not be enough. Ramesses advances rapidly because he understands that imperial authority must be made visible. Both men are acting within systems that reward decisiveness and punish hesitation. Neither can easily step away without weakening the alliances that sustain his power. So the dust around the Egyptian columns carries more than an army. It carries 2 centuries of unresolved competition. Every wheel turning toward Kadesh moves across ground claimed in memory by both sides, and every local ruler watching from the frontier knows that the outcome will determine whose promises, threats, and protection must be taken seriously when the soldiers are gone. Ramesses carries the expectations of empire northward, but he also carries something more personal, the need to define what kind of king he will become. He has inherited a throne strengthened by his father, Seti I, yet inheritance alone cannot create immortality. In the royal world of New Kingdom Egypt, a pharaoh must continually prove that he is capable of preserving order, rewarding the gods, protecting the land, and defeating those presented as threats beyond its borders. Temples can proclaim divine legitimacy, ancestry can support it, and ceremony can display it. But military success gives that legitimacy motion. A young ruler who leads armies into contested territory does more than seek land. He creates the material from which future memory will be built. Ramesses is probably in his 20s when the Kadesh campaign unfolds. Though his exact age remains debated, he has already been prepared for rule under Seti I, appearing in royal scenes, participating in state ceremony, and learning how power is performed as well as exercised. Egyptian kingship is never private. The pharaoh exists before an audience of gods, officials, soldiers, foreign rulers, and future generations. Every monument speaks on his behalf. Every campaign can become evidence that cosmic order remains secure because the king is strong enough to defend it. For Ramesses, whose reign will eventually stretch across more than 6 decades, this early period is still uncertain. The gigantic statues, vast building program, diplomatic marriages, and reputation of Ramesses the Great lie in the future. At Kadesh, that identity is not yet complete. It is being tested. His royal name already places him within a sacred structure. He is Usermatra Setepenre. Powerful is the justice of Re, chosen of Re, while the name Ramesses means Re has fashioned him. These are not decorative titles. They link the living ruler to divine order and make political action part of a cosmic role. The pharaoh is expected to uphold Ma'at, the proper balance of the world, against disorder. Royal art expresses this expectation with almost relentless clarity. The king is shown larger than everyone around him, striking enemies, grasping captives, or charging alone in a chariot while foreign armies scatter. The image does not attempt to reproduce battlefield scale in a literal way. It presents hierarchy. The king appears enormous because his importance is enormous. Ramesses understands this language and will use it with unusual intensity. Even before Kadesh becomes the defining military story of his reign, he has begun shaping his public image through construction, inscriptions, and association with his father's achievements. He completes monuments begun under Seti and places his own identity within them. He builds at major religious centers and establishes new royal residents in the eastern delta, commonly known as Pir Ramesses. Its location is strategically significant. From the eastern delta, the court is closer to the roads leading into Sinai and the Levant, closer to military installations, chariot units, harbours, and supply networks. It is a royal capital facing northeast, toward the frontier where Egypt's ambitions and anxieties converge. This orientation toward Asia is not simply a matter of glory. Egypt's wealth depends partly on secure routes, access to resources, and influence over neighbouring territories. Timber, metals, luxury goods, horses, and other valuable materials move through networks extending beyond the Nile Valley. The pharaoh does not need to annex every region directly to benefit from these connections. Tribute, controlled trade, loyal vassals, and strategic intimidation can achieve much of the same purpose. Yet such arrangements endure only while Egyptian power appears credible. If local rulers believe the Hittites can protect them more effectively, loyalty shifts. Prestige, therefore, has practical weight. A king who fails to respond to defection risks losing more than one ally. Ramesses' earlier campaigns help establish the background to his march on Kadesh. In the first years of his reign, he takes military action in regions to the south and west and along the Levantine coast. The precise reconstruction of these operations remains incomplete, because royal inscriptions tend to emphasize triumph rather than logistics or political ambiguity. Still, they show a ruler eager to present himself as active, mobile, and victorious. In the fourth year of his reign, he campaigns northward and appears to restore Egyptian influence over Amurru, a kingdom whose allegiance has shifted between the great powers. That success is provocative. Amurru lies within the zone the Hittites regard as essential to their southern security. By accepting or encouraging its return to Egypt, Ramesses challenges Muwatalli's authority directly. The following year, the pharaoh returns with a larger army. The campaign is not an impulsive raid. It requires months of preparation. Weapons must be produced and repaired, chariots must be assembled, horses trained, grain collected, and routes organized. Officers coordinate infantry, transport, scouts, scribes, physicians, craftsmen, grooms, and servants. Egyptian military power depends on a broad administrative structure that rarely appears in heroic reliefs. The king may dominate the image, but an army moves because thousands of less visible people maintain it. One surprising feature of New Kingdom warfare is how closely military expansion depends on bureaucracy. Lists, rations, depots, and written orders are as necessary as bows and spears. Ramesses divides his principal force into 4 major formations named for Amun, Re, Ptah, and Set. Their divine names transform the marching army into an extension of Egypt's sacred geography. Amun is associated especially with Thebes and royal authority, Re with the ancient solar center of Heliopolis, Ptah with Memphis and skilled creation, Set, despite later associations with chaos, remains an important, powerful deity with deep connections to the northeastern delta and the Ramesside royal house. The army thus advances beneath the protection of gods whose names also evoke major centers of the kingdom. Ramesses does not present himself as a commander operating alone. He is the chosen ruler leading a divinely ordered force. Yet the royal ideology contains a tension that will become crucial at Kadesh. The king is surrounded by institutions, officers, troops, and gods, but victory must ultimately appear to flow through him. This encourages a narrative structure in which collective success is condensed into royal action. Thousands may march, fight, organize, and survive, but the monument places the pharaoh at the decisive center. That does not mean Ramesses lacks personal courage or military ability. It means that whatever happens will be interpreted through a system that gives his actions a significance no ordinary soldier can possess. His motives for marching north are therefore layered. He seeks to secure Amurru, weaken Hittite influence, restore Egypt's traditional claims, protect roots, discipline uncertain vassals, and demonstrate that his early reign will not be passive. He may also hope to surpass his father, Seti I has campaigned successfully and left behind powerful images of royal warfare. Ramesses inherits not only territory and policy, but a model of kingship against which he will inevitably be measured. Capturing Kadesh, or forcing its submission, could transform a young ruler into the restorer of Egyptian supremacy in Syria. There is ambition here, though it should not be reduced to vanity. Ancient monarchy demands visible accomplishment, a king who builds, campaigns, and celebrates victories is fulfilling the role expected of him. But Ramesses seems unusually gifted at understanding how accomplishment can be enlarged through repetition. He will eventually place his name across Egypt on a scale few rulers can match, sometimes adding it to monuments built by predecessors. His statues will loom over temple entrances. His battle scenes will appear at multiple sacred sites. The same story will be told again and again until repetition itself gives it authority. At this point, however, Kadesh is not yet memory. It is an objective ahead of him. The city promises a victory capable of satisfying strategy, ideology, and personal ambition at once. If it falls, Ramesses can claim to have reversed decades of Hittite expansion. If the Hittite army withdraws, he can return to Egypt as the king whose presence alone restored obedience. The campaign offers exactly the kind of achievement from which monumental kingship is made. What Ramesses cannot know is that Kadesh will indeed grant him immortality, but not in the form he expects. The city will not become the clear Egyptian conquest he seeks. His army will not move through a simple sequence of advance, battle, and submission. Instead, his reputation will emerge from danger, confusion, and a failure transformed by art. The young pharaoh rides north hoping to make history through conquest. Before long, he will be forced to make it through survival. Muwatalli II does not need to defeat Egypt everywhere. He needs to defeat Ramesses at one vulnerable point before the Egyptian army can fully gather around Kadesh. His strategy depends on patience, concealment, and a clear understanding of how an advancing force can be made to expose itself. Rather than meeting Ramesses far to the south or contesting every road into Syria, the Hittite king concentrates strength near the city that matters most. He allows the Egyptians to come forward. He allows them to believe that the decisive enemy is still distant. Then he prepares to strike the army while it is stretched across the landscape, separated into divisions and unable to support itself quickly. The surviving Egyptian accounts describe Muwatalli as hidden with his forces behind or to the east of Kadesh, screened by the city and the river. The exact arrangement remains uncertain. Ancient battle narratives simplify terrain, and the reliefs are designed to display meaning rather than provide a modern tactical map. Yet the broad logic is persuasive. Kadesh gives the Hittite king cover. The Orontes and its surrounding channels restrict movement. The city conceals troop concentrations from observers approaching along the southern road. A force positioned nearby can wait until the leading Egyptians have crossed into the area, while the divisions behind them remain in motion. This is not passive defense. It is an ambush on an imperial scale. Muwatalli has gathered troops from across the Hittite political world. Egyptian inscriptions list numerous allied lands and rulers, presenting them as a vast collection of foreign peoples assembled against the pharaoh. Such lists serve a rhetorical purpose. The more enemies Ramesses faces, the greater his eventual heroism appears. The names and numbers cannot always be accepted literally, and scholars still debate the precise size of the Hittite coalition. Even so, the underlying picture is credible. Hatti governs through a network of dependent kingdoms, treaty partners, royal relatives, and subordinate rulers obligated to provide military support. A major confrontation with Egypt would draw forces from beyond the Hittite homeland itself. The coalition may include contingents associated with northern Syria, Anatolia, and regions linked to Muwatalli by treaty or dynastic influence. Each unit brings its own leadership, equipment, and political expectations. Gathering such a force is an achievement of administration as much as command. Orders must be sent, supplies collected, horses moved, and allied rulers convinced that the campaign serves their interests. Some participate because treaties require it. Others may fear Egyptian expansion. Still others understand that failure to answer the Hittite king's summons could be treated as rebellion. The army's most dramatic element is its chariot force. Egyptian sources give a figure of roughly 2,500 Hittite chariots, though ancient numbers should be treated cautiously. Even a smaller total would represent an enormous concentration of mobile striking power. Hittite chariots are generally shown as heavier vehicles than their Egyptian counterparts, often carrying 3 men rather than 2: a driver, a shield bearer, and a fighter armed for close combat or missile use. The familiar contrast between a light Egyptian chariot and a uniformly heavy Hittite one may be too neat, since designs and battlefield functions could vary. Still, the Hittite vehicles at Kadesh appear intended to deliver shock against troops caught before they can form a stable defensive line. A chariot charge is most effective against disorder. It is less useful against prepared infantry standing on difficult ground, protected by massed shields, archers, and supporting vehicles. Muwatalli's plan therefore depends on timing. His chariots must cross the river and strike not when the entire Egyptian army is assembled, but while one division is exposed on the march. If they can break that formation, they can drive fugitives, animals, and vehicles directly into the Egyptian camp. Multiplying confusion faster than orders can restore control. To create that opportunity, information must be controlled. The 2 Shasu men encountered by the Egyptians become the most famous part of this deception. They tell Ramesses that Muwatalli is far away, supposedly fearful of the pharaoh's advance. The story is almost perfectly shaped to flatter the king and explain his mistake at the same time. Ramesses is deceived not because he lacks courage, the official narrative suggests, but because the enemy fears him enough to rely on treachery. The false report also allows later texts to blame failed intelligence rather than royal judgment alone. Whether the encounter happened exactly as described cannot be proven. The Egyptian accounts were created after the battle and arranged to support a larger narrative of crisis and divine rescue. Yet deliberately planted informants are entirely plausible in ancient warfare. Local travellers can move where soldiers cannot. Nomadic or semi-nomadic groups know roads, water sources, and political conditions across frontier zones. Their identities may be difficult for an invading army to verify. A convincing lie delivered by men who appear frightened or cooperative can be more effective than a hidden regiment. Muwatalli's intelligence network is less visible in the sources because the story survives mainly through Egyptian monuments. Nevertheless, his timing implies that the Hittites know a great deal about Ramesses' movement. Scouts or allied communities may report the Egyptian route, the distance between divisions, and the arrival of the pharaoh near Kadesh. The region is not neutral territory. Local rulers, officials, and inhabitants live within a Hittite sphere of influence and can provide information long before the Egyptians approach the city. Ramesses is moving through contested land, but Muwatalli is operating closer to his established allies and defensive base. The imbalance is significant. The Egyptian king must discover where the Hittites are, The Hittite king needs only to watch the road. Muwatalli himself apparently remains with the main infantry and reserve forces rather than joining the first chariot assault. Egyptian depictions later mock this distance, presenting the Hittite ruler as hesitant or cowardly, while Ramesses fights in the center of danger. From a military perspective, however, keeping the king and the bulk of the army behind the city may be sensible. The chariots form the striking arm, while the infantry reserve protects the command position and remains available if the Egyptians regroup. Muwatalli does not have to risk himself in the initial attack to control the battle. His role is to commit forces at the right moment. This decision will later contribute to one of the battle's central disputes. Some historians argue that Muwatalli fails to exploit his advantage by holding back too much infantry, or by allowing the chariot force to become distracted inside the Egyptian camp. Others caution that the evidence remains incomplete and heavily filtered through Ramesses' presentation. The Hittite king may have believed the first blow had already shattered the Egyptian army. He may have faced difficulties moving infantry rapidly across the river. He may also have been guarding against additional Egyptian formations whose positions were not fully known. No single explanation fully accounts for every decision because no Hittite battle report survives to describe the plan from Muwatalli's perspective. What remains is a reconstruction built from Egyptian texts, reliefs, geography, later political events, and the logic of the attack itself. That reconstruction reveals a commander who has chosen his ground carefully. He has assembled a coalition, concealed his main force, manipulated Egyptian expectations, and prepared a concentrated strike against an army arriving in fragments. There is also a deeper contrast between the two kings. Ramesses intends to make power visible. He marches beneath standards, advances with named divisions, and approaches Kadesh as the living center of Egyptian authority. Muwatalli makes power invisible. His army is strongest precisely because Ramesses cannot see it. One ruler relies on the spectacle of advance, the other on the discipline of waiting. Behind the walls and river bends, horses stand harnessed, chariot crews wait for signals, messengers move between commanders, allied rulers watch the Hittite king whose authority has brought them here. The Egyptians continue to approach, guided by information prepared to draw them forward. Muwatalli has not yet won the battle, but he has already shaped its opening. He has arranged the ground so that Ramesses' confidence becomes part of the weapon aimed against him. The weapon aimed against Ramesses is not only the hidden Hittite army, it is the distance inside his own force. From the eastern delta to the plains of Syria, the Egyptian campaign depends on keeping thousands of men, animals, vehicles, and supplies moving along a narrow chain of roads. On temple walls, an army can appear as a clean procession of standards and chariots advancing beneath the gaze of the king. On the ground, it is a long, vulnerable organism. Its head may be several hours ahead of its body. Its rear may still be struggling through dust and heat, while the front is already choosing a campsite. Every mile gained increases pressure on the system holding it together. The march begins from Ramesses, the royal residence in the eastern Nile Delta, positioned near Egypt's routes into Sinai. From there the army travels through the frontier defences and stations that protect the northeastern approach to the kingdom. It follows the coastal road across northern Sinai, moving between fortified water points and supply depots established by generations of Egyptian administration. This route is sometimes called the Ways of Horus, though it is not a single paved road in the modern sense. It is a managed military corridor, marked by strong points, wells, storage facilities, and settlements capable of supporting troops moving toward Canaan. Crossing Sinai requires planning more than heroism. Water determines speed. Grain determines endurance. Horses must drink frequently and consume large quantities of fodder, especially when pulling chariots through hot, dry terrain. Wooden vehicles require constant inspection. Axles crack, leather straps loosen, wheels warp, and animals develop injuries. Smiths, carpenters, leatherworkers, grooms, physicians, scribes, cooks, and transport crews therefore travel with the fighting force. The image of Ramesses charging alone will later dominate the memory of Kadesh, but the campaign reaches Syria only because an army of specialists maintains the road behind him. The 4 principal divisions provide the structure for this movement. Amun leads with the Pharaoh, Re follows, Tar comes behind Re, and Set forms the rear. Each division likely contains several thousand men, although the exact strength remains uncertain. Modern estimates often suggest roughly 5,000 troops per division, but the Egyptian evidence does not preserve a complete and reliable order of battle. The formations include infantry, archers, officers, chariot crews, standard bearers, and support personnel. They are large enough to fight independently for a time, yet they are intended to cooperate as parts of one field army. Naming the divisions after gods does more than give commanders convenient labels. It places the campaign within the religious order of Egypt. Amun, Re, Ptah, and Set are not distant symbols painted on equipment. Their standards move with the soldiers, marking identity and position. A man marching in the division of Re belongs to a formation with its own officers, routines, and shared sacred association. The arrangement helps organize thousands of individuals who must respond to signals amid noise, dust, and confusion. Once battle begins, standards may be among the few visible reference points in a crowded landscape. Ramesses travels with Amun because the leading division is also the royal centre. His household troops, guards, attendants, scribes, and command staff move near him. The king's presence increases the division's prestige, but it also creates a concentration of responsibility. Orders must flow outward from the royal camp. Reports must find their way inward. If Amun becomes isolated, the army's political and military centre becomes isolated with it. The divisions do not march shoulder to shoulder. Roads, water sources, and the need to avoid congestion force them into a long sequence. A formation of thousands cannot move as a compact block across every landscape. Narrow passages compress columns. River crossings slow them. Baggage animals fall behind. Chariots require space and firmer ground than infantry, even under good conditions. The distance separating the front of one division from the rear of another can become substantial. Near Kadesh, those ordinary gaps become tactically dangerous. The Egyptian army advances through Canaan and along the Levantine corridor, passing regions that have been connected to Egyptian rule for generations. Some towns provide supplies because they are loyal. Others comply because the army is present. Local governors and vassal rulers understand that hospitality toward a royal force is not optional. Grain, bread, beer, livestock, and fodder must be collected or requisitioned. The march may appear to be a display of imperial control, yet every demand also reveals the limits of that control. An army operating far from Egypt cannot carry everything it needs from the Nile. It depends on roads and communities whose loyalty may weaken as soon as the soldiers leave. This dependence becomes more severe as Ramesses moves beyond the regions most securely tied to Egypt. Messages take longer to reach the delta. Reinforcements cannot arrive quickly. Supplies must come from forward bases, friendly ports, or the territory through which the army passes. The Egyptians may have benefited from coastal support and from forces arriving through Amuru, but the details remain incomplete. What survives in the record suggests careful preparation, though not perfect coordination. One lesser-known element in the Kadesh accounts is the presence of a force commonly called the Ne'arin. Their identity remains debated. They may have been troops recruited from Amuru, an Egyptian-aligned contingent moving from the coast, a specialized Egyptian formation, or some combination of local and imperial soldiers. The reliefs show them arriving at a crucial moment, but their exact route and relationship to the main divisions remain uncertain. Their existence reveals that Ramesses' army is more complicated than four neatly separated columns. Additional forces are moving through the region, and not all of them follow the same road. The main army, however, proceeds northward in a predictable order. Ramesses crosses the region known in the accounts as the Valley of the Cedars and continues toward the upper Orontes. The names attached to the route are not always easy to match with modern geography, and scholars still debate specific locations and daily stages. What matters is the pattern the pharaoh moves quickly, perhaps eager to reach Kadesh before the Hittites can respond. Speed can preserve surprise, but it also widens the distance between formations. Amun reaches the vicinity of Kadesh first. Re remains several miles to the south, still marching in column. Ta follows farther back, while Set may be too distant to influence the opening battle at all. The divisions are not lost. They're following the planned route. The failure lies in allowing the army to approach a suspected enemy position without first concentrating its strength or confirming where Muwatalli's forces are. Such errors are easier to identify after the event. Ramesses believes the Hittite king is far away. Under that assumption, there is no immediate need to halt and wait for all four divisions. The leading troops can establish camp, rest, and prepare for the next operation while the rest of the army closes the gap. The decision becomes disastrous only because the information supporting it is false. The pace of the march also affects the soldiers. Men arriving after hours on the road are not entering battle in ideal condition. They are carrying shields, bows, spears, food, water, and personal equipment beneath the Syrian sun. Dust coats their faces and clothing. Horses are tired. Officers are occupied with keeping units together. A marching division surprised by chariots has little time to convert from a long column into a defensive formation. Units near the front may not know what is happening behind them. Those at the rear may hear the attack before they see it. The division of Re is especially exposed. It advances toward the Egyptian camp along the road south of Kadesh, unaware that Hittite chariots are preparing to cross its path. Its soldiers are not yet arranged for a major engagement. The column contains gaps, vehicles, and men moving at different speeds. When the attack comes, the Hittites will not strike a solid wall of Egyptian infantry. They will strike the army while it is still becoming an army. Meanwhile, Amun enters the camp near the pharaoh. Tents rise, shields, bows, and equipment are unloaded. Chariots are positioned, animals are watered where possible. The rectangular camp is enclosed by an improvised barrier of shields, perhaps supplemented by baggage and other equipment. Royal tents occupy the interior, where Ramesses' attendants and officers establish the administrative heart of the expedition. It is a familiar ritual at the end of a march, order being rebuilt after movement. Yet the calm is deceptive. The king has one division around him, another approaching, and two more stretched down the road. Muwatalli has concentrated his striking force. Ramesses has distributed his own across the landscape. The separation may have been no greater than what ordinary campaigning required. No commander can keep tens of thousands of people packed together continuously. But near Kadesh, geography, speed, and failed intelligence combine to turn routine marching intervals into openings for destruction. The Egyptian army still looks powerful from any single point along the road. Only from above would its weakness be obvious. 4 named divisions, each carrying the authority of a god, moving toward the same battlefield but not yet close enough to save one another. As the last tents of Amun are secured, the soldiers of Re continue through the dust. They march toward the pharaoh, toward the city, and directly across the path chosen for the Hittite charge. The 2 men brought before Ramesses appear to confirm everything he wants to believe. They are identified in the Egyptian accounts as shahsu, a broad term used for mobile pastoral groups living across parts of the Levant and surrounding deserts. Their clothing, movement through the frontier, and apparent knowledge of local roads make them plausible informants. They claim to have abandoned the Hittite king. Muwatalli, they say, has withdrawn far to the north, frightened by the pharaoh's approach and unwilling to face Egypt in battle. The message is flattering, timely, and catastrophically useful. Ramesses accepts it. The scene survives because the king later orders it preserved as part of the official explanation for what follows. It appears within a carefully constructed sequence in which Egypt's danger begins with deception. The enemy cannot defeat the pharaoh through strength alone, so the story implies and must first rely on falsehood. Muwatalli becomes the hidden architect of treachery, while Ramesses remains brave, energetic, and ultimately favoured by the gods. Yet even within that royal framing, the admission is extraordinary. Egyptian texts acknowledge that the pharaoh enters the battlefield without knowing where the main Hittite force is. The 2 shahsu are not simply colourful figures added to the narrative. Their report changes the behaviour of an entire army. Believing the enemy distant, Ramesses continues toward Kadesh, rather than halting to concentrate his divisions. He crosses into the area with Amun, establishes camp, and allows the long road behind him to remain occupied by Ta and Set. The intelligence failure, therefore, does not produce a minor misunderstanding. It shapes the battlefield before the first chariot moves. Ancient commanders rarely possess complete information. Scouts can disappear. Messengers may be delayed. Local guides may exaggerate, conceal, or misunderstand what they have seen. Dust clouds can suggest an army where none exists, or hide one moving behind terrain. The size of a force is especially difficult to estimate from a distance. A commander must make decisions from fragments, and those fragments often arrive through people whose motives cannot be verified. Ramesses' mistake is not that he relies on human intelligence. He has no alternative. The failure lies in treating one reassuring report as sufficient evidence when approaching a major fortified position inside contested territory. The official accounts later insist that Egyptian scouts and officers had failed to discover the Hittites. This distributes responsibility beyond the king. Ramesses is presented as having been poorly served by subordinates, a pattern that becomes even more pronounced once the battle begins. His officers, troops, and chariot commanders will be condemned for abandoning him, while his own courage is elevated. Such blame may preserve a genuine memory of command failures, but it also protects the central image of kingship. The pharaoh can be deceived by enemies and disappointed by servants. He cannot be shown as fundamentally unworthy of rule. The first report does not remain unchallenged for long. Egyptian scouts capture 2 other Hittite agents near the camp. These men are treated harshly during interrogation, as ancient military captives often were, though the surviving narrative is more concerned with the information extracted than with their experience. Under questioning, they reveal that Muwatalli is not far away at all. He is concealed with his coalition behind Kadesh. The enemy whom Ramesses believes to be days away is close enough to strike almost immediately. This second intelligence encounter creates the dramatic reversal on which the Kadesh story turns. The first pair draws Ramesses forward, the second exposes the trap, but too late to prevent it. The pharaoh summons his officials and confronts them with their failure. In the Egyptian telling, the commanders admit that they did not know the Hittite army was nearby. Ramesses orders urgent messages sent south to accelerate the arrival of Tar and the other forces. A crisis of information becomes a race against distance. The timing is brutal. Correct intelligence arrives only after Ramesses has established camp, and while Re is still approaching in marching formation. Even the most accurate report has limited value if there is no time to act on it. Messengers must find officers, explain the danger, and travel over ground already crowded with troops and baggage. Divisions cannot instantly abandon their order and appear beside the king. Men several miles away may not even know that the enemy has been found before the attack reaches them. The Hittites have achieved more than concealment. They have controlled the moment at which concealment ends. Muwatalli does not need Ramesses to remain deceived throughout the battle. He needs the truth to emerge only after the Egyptians have committed themselves to a vulnerable arrangement. Once Amun is in camp and Re is exposed on the road, discovery no longer protects the pharaoh. It merely informs him of the danger rushing toward him. The role of the Shasu in this episode also reveals the complicated position of mobile communities along imperial frontiers. Egyptian records often present such groups through the concerns of the state as travelers, herders, raiders, enemies, laborers, guides, or potential informants. In reality, their relationships with settled kingdoms and great powers are likely to have varied widely. Some may trade with cities, serve armies, move livestock seasonally, or pass through regions claimed by rulers who exercise little daily control over them. The label does not identify a single unified people with one political allegiance. That ambiguity makes the first two men ideal instruments of deception. They can plausibly claim knowledge of Muwatalli's movements without appearing to belong formally to his army. They may be genuine Hittite agents recruited for the task. They may be local men compelled or persuaded to deliver a prepared message. It is also possible that the official narrative sharpens a more confused intelligence episode into a clear story of planted spies. Scholars still debate how literally the scene should be read because no independent account confirms the exchange. The structure is suspiciously elegant. Two false informants mislead the king. Two captured agents reveal the truth. The symmetry serves literature as well as history. It makes the disaster comprehensible, rather than presenting a gradual failure of reconnaissance, overconfidence, uncertain maps, and imperfect communication. The text gives the audience a decisive moment when truth is replaced by a lie. Ancient royal inscriptions often compress complex causes into memorable scenes, and the Shasu encounter may do exactly that. Yet literary shaping does not make the event meaningless. Even if the conversations were simplified, the Egyptians were clearly surprised by the location and timing of the Hittite attack. Their divisions were separated in a way that only makes sense if the command believed there was no immediate threat. The ambush itself supports the central claim that Muwatalli successfully concealed his army, and that Ramesses advanced without adequate knowledge. There may also be a quieter reason the false report succeeds. It agrees with the political theatre of the Egyptian campaign. Ramesses is the mighty king advancing north. Foreign rulers are expected to fear him. Enemies retreat before his presence. A message claiming that Muwatalli has fled does not merely provide information. It confirms the worldview projected by Egyptian kingship. The lie fits the story before the battle has even begun. This is a recurring danger in warfare and government. Intelligence that challenges expectation demands caution, while intelligence that confirms expectation slips easily into certainty. Ramesses may have received other reports that are no longer preserved. His officers may have searched the area and found nothing. The army may have believed Muwatalli lacked time to assemble his coalition. The evidence remains incomplete, but the decision to proceed shows that the possibility of a nearby Hittite force was judged less likely than it should have been. Once the captured agents reveal the truth, Ramesses can no longer maintain the illusion of a retreating enemy. He knows that the Hittite king has outmaneuvered him. His anger toward his commanders, whether historically exact or rhetorically enlarged, reflects the seriousness of the situation. The pharaoh has not simply lost an opportunity. He has placed himself, the royal household, and the leading division within reach of a concentrated enemy attack. Orders move south. Officers rush to prepare the camp. Men search the horizon for signs of the force hidden beyond Kadesh. It is possible that some still imagine there will be time to form a defensive line. The city blocks their view, and the river conceals movement on the opposite side. The battlefield remains outwardly calm, but the calm has changed. It is no longer the calm of ignorance. It is the brief, tightening interval between warning and impact. South of the camp, the division of Re continues its approach. Its soldiers have not heard the interrogation. They do not know that the first informants lied or that the Hittite king is close. They see the road, the dust of the men ahead, and perhaps the distant standards of Amun near the royal camp. The information that could save them is moving in one direction. The Hittite chariots are moving faster in another. The spies have completed their work. From this point onward, the battle belongs to momentum. By the time the truth reaches the royal camp, Ramesses is already living inside the consequences of the lie. The division of Amun has halted northwest of Kadesh, close enough for the city's walls and mound to dominate the horizon, yet far enough from the rest of the Egyptian army that support cannot arrive at once. Tents have been raised, chariots have been unyoked or positioned, baggage animals, servants, officers, guards, scribes, and soldiers crowd into an enclosure arranged for rest rather than immediate battle. What had been chosen as a temporary centre of command has become a vulnerable island. The camp itself appears in Egyptian reliefs as a large rectangular space protected by rows of shields and perhaps reinforced with carts, baggage, and portable barriers. The representation is highly ordered, more diagram than eyewitness sketch, but it captures an important truth: the royal camp is not a fortress. It can resist confusion and opportunistic attack, yet it is not designed to withstand the concentrated charge of hundreds of chariots. Its defensive edge depends on men reaching their positions, maintaining formation, and understanding where the threat is coming from. Surprise attacks all three conditions at once. At the centre stands the royal pavilion, the symbolic heart of the army. Ramesses' camp includes far more than his sleeping quarters. It contains the administrative machinery of command officers waiting for orders, scribes recording events and supplies, attendants responsible for royal equipment, guards watching approaches, and messengers moving between units. The pharaoh's presence draws authority inward. It also draws risk inward. If the camp falls, Egypt does not merely lose tents and baggage. It risks losing the king around whom the campaign, army, and state are politically organized. Ramesses now knows that Muwatalli is concealed nearby. He also knows that most of his army is absent. Amun is present but unsettled after the march. Re is approaching from the south without warning. Ptah remains farther away, and Set is farther still. Orders have been dispatched, but orders cannot compress distance. The Pharaoh can summon men faster than they were already moving, yet he cannot make them appear beside him. This is the moment when royal confidence must give way to calculation. Ramesses has to prepare the camp, alert Amun, send warnings south, and determine whether the Hittites are about to attack from across the river, around the city, or along another route. The Egyptian sources present him reprimanding his officials for failing to discover the enemy's position. That scene serves the later legend, but it may also preserve the shock of a command structure suddenly forced to confront its blindness. Officers who had expected an orderly concentration near Kadesh now realize that the main enemy force is within striking distance. The uncertainty is as dangerous as the knowledge itself. Ramesses knows Muwatalli is close, but he may not know exactly where every Hittite formation stands or which part of his army will be attacked first. The city blocks lines of sight, dust can conceal movement, river channels and cultivated ground complicate observation. Scouts sent out after the revelation have little time to report. The Pharaoh has entered the strange interval in which a commander understands that an attack is coming but cannot yet see its shape. The soldiers of Amun begin turning the camp from a resting place into a defensive position. Shields are taken up, bows are readied, chariot teams prepare horses. Officers attempt to restore unit order among men who have already started unloading equipment. The process is slower than a heroic inscription admits. A division at rest is spread through tasks. Some men are fetching water, others are caring for animals, repairing gear, distributing rations, or erecting shelters. The army must reverse all of this at speed. Near the royal centre stand troops whose primary duty is to protect Ramesses. The pharaoh's bodyguard likely includes experienced warriors, among them Sheridan, who had entered Egyptian service. The Sheridan appear in New Kingdom sources as formidable fighters, often shown wearing distinctive horned helmets and carrying round shields. Their origins and precise role remain debated, but some served as elite soldiers within the Egyptian military establishment. At Kadesh, they are important because the later image of Ramesses abandoned by everyone obscures the reality that trained guards remain around him. The bodyguard does not diminish the pharaoh's danger. It explains how danger can be survived. A royal camp under attack still contains organized resistance, men accustomed to protecting the king, and officers capable of gathering troops around visible standards. Ramesses may fight personally, and the evidence does not require dismissing his courage. But courage operates within a protective network of guards, chariot crews, archers, attendants, and soldiers who remain able to respond. The official narrative will later narrow this network almost to invisibility. Ramesses is made to stand alone before countless enemies, calling on Amun after his army deserts him. The image serves theology as much as military memory. If the pharaoh is abandoned by human support, divine support becomes more dramatic. Amun hears him because the king has honored the god. The rescue proves the sacred relationship between ruler and deity. Collective survival becomes a revelation of royal uniqueness. At the camp before the attack, however, there is no finished theology. There are only hurried preparations and the growing sense that the army has been caught in the wrong arrangement. Men look toward Kadesh and the river. Officers wait for scouts. Messengers depart southward, carrying commands to Tar and perhaps to Re, though the latter may already be beyond the point where warning can arrive in time. The city itself remains strangely passive in the Egyptian account. Kadesh is the object of the campaign, yet during the opening crisis it functions almost like a wall behind which the Hittite plan unfolds. Its ruler and inhabitants disappear beneath the larger story of the two kings. Archaeology reminds us that the city is not an empty backdrop. It is a living settlement, fortified because generations have understood its strategic value. From its elevated position, observers may be watching both armies move through the surrounding plain. The people inside know that the Egyptian pharaoh has arrived and that Muwatalli's coalition is concealed nearby. They are closer to the truth than much of the Egyptian army. Ramesses' location near the city may initially have seemed advantageous. He can observe Kadesh, threaten it, and establish a base for siege or negotiation once the rest of the army arrives. Water and open ground are available nearby. The leading division can rest after the march. Under the assumption that the Hittites are distant, the camp is sensible. Under the reality of their concealment, it becomes a target framed by river, city, and scattered Egyptian formations. The pharaoh cannot simply retreat. A withdrawal begun in confusion could expose Amun on the road and collide with Re approaching from the south. It could also damage the authority that brought the army north. Nor can he immediately assault Kadesh, whose defences remain intact and whose surrounding ground may already be controlled by Hittite forces. His best hope is to hold, gather information, and bring the divisions together before Muwatalli acts. But Muwatalli has waited precisely to deny him that time. Across the landscape, the Hittite chariot force begins moving from concealment. Crews guide their vehicles toward a crossing south of the city. Horses accelerate over the ground. Wheels strike dust and hard soil. The movement may not yet be visible from the royal camp, especially with Kadesh obstructing the view. The first Egyptians to encounter the attack will not be the guards around Ramesses. They will be the men of Re still marching toward him. The separation between the divisions now becomes more than a weakness on a map. It becomes a channel through which panic can travel. If Re breaks, its fugitives will run north toward the camp. If Hittite chariots follow them, the confusion of one formation will be carried directly into another. Ramesses' enclosure, already crowded and only partly prepared, will receive not a clear warning but a flood of men, animals, and vehicles moving ahead of the enemy. Inside the camp there may still be a belief that the danger can be managed. Amun is a substantial force. The pharaoh is protected. Reinforcements are on the road. The Hittites have not yet appeared. Ancient battlefields can remain quiet until almost the instant they become uncontrollable. Ramesses stands beneath the walls of Kadesh with one division, an incomplete picture, and a royal court hastily becoming a defensive command post. Behind him stretches the road to Egypt. Before him lies the city he came to master. Somewhere beyond it, Muwatalli has already released the strike. The pharaoh is not yet surrounded, but every path by which he might escape the crisis is beginning to close. The first impact does not fall on Ramesses. It falls on the division of Re, still stretched along the road south of the royal camp, marching toward Kadesh under the assumption that the route ahead is secure. The men have not formed a battle line. Chariots, infantry, officers, baggage, and support personnel move in a long column shaped by the road rather than by the enemy. Some soldiers may hear the approaching wheels before they understand what the sound means. Others see dust rising from the side of the route, where no Egyptian force is expected to appear. Then the Hittite chariots break into view. They have crossed the Orontes somewhere south of Kadesh, using the city and river landscape to conceal their movement until they're close to the exposed Egyptian formation. The exact crossing point remains debated, as does the precise direction of the assault. But the tactical purpose is clear. Muwatalli's chariot force does not attack the strongest part of Ramesses' army. It strikes the moving space between the divisions, where Re has neither the protection of the royal camp nor the support of Tar behind it. The charge transforms the road almost instantly. A marching column requires time and space to deploy. Infantry must turn toward the threat, close ranks, lift shields, and bring bows or spears into useful positions. Chariots must leave the line of march, find open ground, and organize themselves into groups capable of maneuvering. Orders must pass from officers to men who may not even be able to see the attackers through dust and congestion. The Hittites give them almost none of that time. The heavier chariots drive into the formation with momentum built across open ground. Horses, wheels, shields, and armed crews force gaps through men caught in the wrong alignment. The violence of ancient chariot warfare is often imagined as a direct collision between vehicles and dense ranks, but its greatest effect may lie in disruption. A fast-moving chariot threatens multiple points at once. It scatters individuals before formations can close. It cuts communication along the road. It frightens animals, overturns carts, and forces soldiers to choose between standing in an incomplete line or moving away from the impact. Once one part of air gives way, movement spreads through the rest. Men farther down the column may see only those ahead turning back. They cannot know whether the enemy consists of dozens of chariots or thousands. Dust hides scale. Noise destroys clarity. An officer trying to order a stand competes with horses, wheels, shouted warnings, and the pressure of bodies moving in the opposite direction. Panic does not require every soldier to lose discipline. It requires enough uncertainty that no one trusts the formation to hold. The Hittite attack appears to split or roll up the division, driving men northward toward Ramesses' camp. Some Egyptian units may resist, and the entire formation is unlikely to have dissolved in exactly the same way at the same moment. Royal narratives simplify battle into dramatic collapse and recovery. What survives in the record suggests, however, that Re is severely disrupted and that large numbers of its soldiers flee or are pushed toward Amun. The division that should have reinforced Ramesses instead carries the battle directly to him. This is the hidden elegance of Muwatalli's plan. The Egyptian camp does not need to be found by scouts or approached cautiously. The broken troops of Re show the way. They move toward the Pharaoh because that is where safety, command, and friendly forces are expected to be. Hittite chariots follow close behind, using the fugitives as both cover and a force of disruption. The defensive boundary of the camp is therefore struck by two waves at once. Egyptians desperate to enter and enemies determined to enter with them. From inside the enclosure, the first visible sign may be the sudden appearance of men running from the south. Their arrival creates confusion before any clear report can be delivered. Guards at the perimeter face an impossible choice. Closing the camp may protect the Pharaoh but abandon their own soldiers outside. Opening it allows the retreating division through, but destroys the controlled entrance needed for defense. Men of Re press toward gaps, over barriers, and between shield lines. Chariots and baggage crowd together. The ordered geometry shown in later reliefs gives way to the physical reality of too many bodies entering too little space. Then the Hittite vehicles reach the camp. The outer defences are not designed to absorb a charge arriving inside a mass of friendly troops. Shield barriers break or are forced aside. Horses leap or stumble through obstacles. Egyptian chariots struggle to maneuver among tents, carts, animals, and men. The Hittites pour into an environment that is both vulnerable and dangerous. The camp offers rich targets, royal equipment, baggage, weapons, supplies, and the visible signs of command. It also restricts movement, breaking the cohesion of the attacking chariot groups once they pass the perimeter. For the Egyptians, the immediate effect is near catastrophe. The army's command center is penetrated. Amun, already preparing for attack, is struck before it can establish a complete defensive arrangement. Re arrives not as an organized reinforcement, but as a stream of disordered survivors. The pharaoh's attendants, guards, chariot crews, and officers find the enemy among the tents. What had been a military camp becomes a compressed battlefield where no one has a clear view beyond the next cluster of men and vehicles. The later Egyptian account presents the troops as abandoning Ramesses in terror. It condemns officers and soldiers who fail their king, creating the moral emptiness in which his personal heroism can shine. Reality is likely more complicated. Some men flee, others attempt to regroup, some may not know where the pharaoh is. Units become separated from standards. Soldiers from Re and Amun mix together, making commands difficult to recognize. The collapse of organization can resemble cowardice when retold from the center of royal power, but battle often destroys coordination long before it destroys willingness to fight. The Hittite chariot crews face their own loss of control. Their initial success has carried them into the Egyptian camp, but success creates temptation. Egyptian sources claim that the attackers begin plundering instead of maintaining pressure. This detail may serve Ramesses' narrative by portraying the enemy as greedy and undisciplined, yet it is plausible that some crews turn toward valuable baggage or royal possessions. In ancient warfare, spoils are not an incidental reward. They are part of the economic logic of victory. A camp apparently collapsing before them may look like proof that the battle has already been won. That assumption is dangerous. Chariots are most effective when moving together across open ground. Inside the crowded enclosure, they become separated. Vehicles must turn around tents and obstacles. Horses tire or lose momentum. Crews dismount or become absorbed in close fighting and plunder. The force that shattered Re as a coordinated weapon begins to fragment into smaller groups. The Hittites have entered the heart of the Egyptian position, but they have also entered terrain that reduces the advantage of their charge. Muwatalli remains beyond Kadesh with much of his infantry and reserve. From his position, the full condition of the camp may be difficult to judge. Dust hangs over the battlefield. Messengers take time. He may believe the chariot assault has destroyed the leading Egyptian divisions. He may be waiting to see whether Tar or another force approaches. He may also face the practical difficulty of moving large bodies of infantry across the river and around the city quickly enough to exploit the breakthrough. Scholars still debate whether he misses the decisive opportunity of the battle, or whether later Egyptian storytelling exaggerates how close Ramesses comes to total defeat. Inside the camp, that distinction means little. The danger is immediate. The enemy has broken through. Egyptian troops are mixed with Hittite chariots. The perimeter no longer protects the royal center. The pharaoh's position can no longer be concealed by orderly ranks because orderly ranks have ceased to exist. Ramesses must now act with whatever remains near him. His bodyguard is still present. Royal chariot crews and surviving soldiers begin to collect around visible points of command. Archers may find targets among vehicles slowed by congestion. Egyptian chariots that can reach open ground gain room to maneuver against Hittite groups, no longer advancing as one mass. The very chaos that brought the enemy into the camp also prevents the enemy from closing around the king with perfect coordination. Later, the walls of temples will turn this moment into a clean image Ramesses alone, bow drawn, reins tied around his body, enemies scattered before him. The battlefield offers nothing so orderly. It offers dust, collapsed boundaries, Frightened horses, broken formations, and a ruler whose army has been struck at its weakest point. The Hittite chariots have crossed the river, crushed Re, and entered the royal camp. Muwatalli's trap has worked almost exactly as intended, yet a trap becomes victory only if the enemy remains unable to recover. Among the tents of Amun, surrounded by the consequences of his own misjudgment, Ramesses begins the struggle not to conquer Kadesh, but to prevent his campaign from ending around him. Ramesses does not experience the collapse as a historian will later reconstruct it. He sees fragments, Hittite chariots among the tents, Egyptian soldiers running through the camp, horses twisting against reins, standards disappearing behind dust, and officers trying to gather men who can no longer hear one another. The pharaoh has no elevated view of the battlefield. He cannot know how much of Re has survived, how quickly Tar is approaching, or whether Muwatalli's infantry is already moving across the river. What he knows is immediate and personal. The royal camp has been penetrated, the enemy is close, and the Egyptian army's centre is in danger of being overwhelmed. The official accounts transform this crisis into the defining moment of Ramesses' kingship. In the poem and related inscriptions, the pharaoh discovers that he has been abandoned. His troops flee, his chariot forces fail him, and no prince or officer remains worthy of trust. Surrounded by vast numbers of enemies, he calls upon Amun, reminding the god of the temples, offerings, and monuments he has provided. Amun hears him. Strength enters the king. Ramesses turns upon the Hittites and drives them back almost by himself. The scene is magnificent because it is constructed to be magnificent. Human support disappears so that divine support can become visible. The king's isolation proves his exceptional nature. Ordinary soldiers depend on formations, officers, and numbers. Ramesses depends only on the god who chose him. The battlefield becomes a sacred test in which political legitimacy, personal courage, and divine favour are revealed at once. Yet the fact that the story is shaped by royal ideology does not mean Ramesses remained safely hidden while others fought. His position near the centre of the camp makes personal danger entirely plausible. A king commanding from a chariot is not protected by distance in the way a later general might be. He must remain visible enough for troops to recognise him and for orders to carry authority. His royal insignia, distinctive equipment, attendants, and standards may also make him easier for enemies to identify. If Hittite crews understand that the Egyptian king is inside the camp, capturing or killing him could turn a tactical success into a political catastrophe for Egypt. Ramesses therefore has powerful reasons to fight, or at least to be seen directing the resistance from close range. Retreating without control could spread panic further. Remaining passive could allow the royal position to be surrounded. The pharaoh's presence offers one of the few surviving points around which broken troops can reorganize. Men who no longer know where their division stands may still recognize the royal chariot, the king's standards, or the guards clustered around him. Those guards matter. The Egyptian texts repeatedly emphasize Ramesses' loneliness, but other evidence indicates that the royal bodyguard remains active. The bulletin describes the king together with forces near him being encircled, language that does not require absolute solitude. Studies of the battle have drawn attention to the Shurden and other elite soldiers whose duty is precisely to prevent the pharaoh from becoming isolated beyond rescue. They may form a defensive corps, protect access to the royal chariot, and attack Hittite crews whose vehicles have slowed inside the congested camp. The royal household also includes trained chariot personnel. Ramesses does not prepare, harness, and maneuver his vehicle entirely alone. Drivers, shield bearers, grooms, armourers, and attendants support the king before and during battle. Egyptian royal imagery may show the pharaoh controlling horses and shooting his bow simultaneously, an image of superhuman coordination, but the practical world around that image is filled with specialists. The heroic composition removes them because their presence would weaken the visual claim that all decisive force flows through the king. Still, Ramesses may have performed acts of genuine courage. He is trained for chariot warfare, raised within a military court, and expected to embody controlled aggression. The composite bow used from an Egyptian chariot can strike effectively at moving or exposed targets. Once Hittite vehicles lose formation inside and around the camp, a mobile archer can attack crews struggling to turn, regroup, or escape. Ramesses' lighter chariot may possess advantages in speed and maneuverability over vehicles designed for shock. With bodyguards securing space around him, the pharaoh can launch repeated attacks against scattered groups without facing the full Hittite force as a single mass. Later inscriptions describe him charging into the enemy again and again. The number of charges and the scale of destruction belong to the language of royal celebration, not a reliable battlefield count, yet repeated counterattacks are tactically plausible. The Egyptians need to push the Hittite crews away from the royal centre, reopen movement inside the camp, and create enough space for archers and chariots to operate. A single dramatic charge cannot restore the situation. Recovery requires sustained resistance from multiple groups forming around surviving commanders. The pharaoh's role is therefore best understood neither as solitary fantasy nor as an ordinary contribution hidden beneath propaganda. He is likely a real participant whose actions are magnified until everyone around him nearly disappears. His courage becomes the organizing symbol for a wider Egyptian response. Soldiers who stand their ground, guards who protect him, archers who shoot from behind improvised positions, and chariot crews who re-enter the fight are absorbed into the image of one king. This transformation reflects the nature of Egyptian royal inscriptions. They are not modern operational reports designed to preserve uncertainty, acknowledge collective action, or assess command errors impartially. They express how kingship should be understood. The pharaoh restores order when disorder threatens the world. Foreign enemies appear as a mass of chaos. The god supports the legitimate ruler. Victory is not merely the destruction of the enemy forces, it is the restoration of the correct hierarchy. Kadesh offers unusually rich material for this message because the historical crisis is so severe. Ramesses does not need to invent danger. The surprise attack, broken division, and penetration of the camp provide a genuine moment of near disaster. Royal presentation changes the meaning of that danger. The pharaoh's poor intelligence and exposed position become necessary conditions for heroism. The collapse of Egyptian coordination becomes proof that Ramesses is superior even to his own army. The Hittite breakthrough becomes the stage on which divine favour saves Egypt. There is also a practical political reason to frame events this way. A king returning from a campaign without Kadesh must explain why the expedition deserves commemoration. Blaming troops entirely would risk undermining the army, while admitting personal misjudgment would damage royal authority. The heroic narrative solves both problems. The army fails temporarily, but the king restores it. The enemy achieves surprise, but only through deception. The campaign does not secure its main objective. Yet the pharaoh demonstrates a form of victory greater than possession of a city he survives overwhelming odds because the god recognizes him. How close Ramesses comes to death or capture cannot be measured. The phrase surrounded may describe a genuine encirclement of the royal position, a broader tactical crisis, or a literary intensification of the camp's penetration. Hittite chariots certainly enter the Egyptian enclosure, but there is no evidence that every escape route is sealed or that Ramesses faces the whole enemy army at once. Muwatalli's main infantry remains outside the camp, and the attacking chariots have become dispersed. The danger is extreme without being as geometrically complete as later art suggests. The evidence remains incomplete because the surviving narrative is overwhelmingly Egyptian. No Hittite commander leaves a detailed description of seeing Ramesses in the camp. No neutral observer records which troops fought closest to him. Historians must work backward from texts designed to celebrate, reliefs designed to communicate hierarchy, and strategic consequences that reveal what the monuments prefer not to emphasize. What emerges is more compelling than either simple belief or simple dismissal. Ramesses is neither the lone warrior of temple imagery, nor merely a passive beneficiary of other men's courage. He is a young king caught in a disaster partly created by his own decisions, responding with enough resolve to remain at the center of resistance. His bodyguard, surviving soldiers, and chariot forces make that resistance possible. His presence gives it cohesion. Later memory fuses all of them into one figure with a drawn bow. Around him, the camp is still contested. Hittite crews remain among the tents and beyond the shattered perimeter. Egyptian formations have not yet fully recovered. Reinforcements are still somewhere on the road. Ramesses has not won the battle. He has done something more immediate. He has prevented the collapse from swallowing the royal centre in its first violent rush. The king who came to conquer Kadesh now fights to preserve the possibility of any outcome other than ruin. History will eventually call the moment victory. On the battlefield, it is still only survival taking shape. Survival begins when the Hittite attack loses the shape that made it so dangerous. The first chargers crossed the river, shattered the division of Re, and burst into the Egyptian camp with enough speed to turn surprise into panic. But momentum cannot be preserved indefinitely. Once the chariots pass through the broken perimeter, they enter a crowded field of tents, baggage, animals, overturned equipment, fleeing soldiers, and isolated pockets of resistance. The force that moved as a coordinated weapon across open ground now begins to divide into smaller groups, each responding to whatever lies immediately before it. Some Hittite crews pursue Egyptians through the camp. Others turn toward baggage and royal property. Still others attempt to wheel around and attack soldiers collecting near the pharaoh. The precise balance between combat and plunder cannot be reconstructed, and the Egyptian claim that greed distracted the attackers may partly serve a moral purpose. In royal storytelling, enemies lose because they are disorderly, arrogant, and unable to resist spoils. Yet plundering a captured camp is entirely plausible. To chariot warriors who have just broken an Egyptian division and penetrated the royal enclosure, the battle may appear finished. The tents, weapons, livestock, and valuable equipment around them look like the rewards of victory. That assumption gives the Egyptians time. Ramesses' guards form the most immediate center of resistance. Around them gather royal chariot crews, archers, surviving soldiers of Amun, and men from Re who have recovered enough discipline to turn back toward the enemy. Their formations are improvised, but they no longer need to defend the whole camp at once. They need to keep the Hittite chariots from reaching the royal center in a unified mass. Every vehicle slowed by obstacles becomes vulnerable. Every crew separated from its companions can be attacked from several directions. Archers shoot at horses and exposed men. Infantry close on vehicles that cannot maneuver. Egyptian chariots find patches of open ground from which they can strike and withdraw. The lighter Egyptian vehicles are well suited to this changing battle. Their value lies not in smashing directly into heavier chariots, but in speed, turning ability, and mobile archery. Once the Hittite formation becomes fragmented, Egyptian crews can attack its edges, release arrows, and avoid prolonged collision. Ramesses' counterattacks, later magnified into solitary charges against thousands, probably belong to this phase repeated movements against scattered enemies whose initial tactical advantage is fading inside the camp. The recovery is not sudden. Panic does not vanish because the king appears. Officers must locate standards, collect men from different units, and create recognizable groups amid the confusion. Soldiers of Re who have lost contact with their commanders may join whoever seems organized nearby. Men of Amun fight from positions never intended as defensive strongpoints. Baggage carts, shield barriers, tents, and dead ground become improvised obstacles. The camp that failed as a perimeter begins to help the defenders internally by breaking the movement of enemy chariots. The Hittites still hold the advantage in numbers at the point of attack, but they no longer concentrate that advantage effectively. Their vehicles enter in waves, and some may become trapped behind others. Horses tire quickly under the strain of charging, turning, and pulling through congested terrain. Crews that dismount to fight or seize valuables lose the mobility that carried them into the camp. The same narrow gaps that allowed them to follow the fugitives of Re now make withdrawal difficult when Egyptian resistance stiffens. Then another force appears. The Egyptian reliefs and texts describe the arrival of the Nearin, a contingent whose exact identity remains one of the battle's persistent mysteries. They may be troops from Amuru, soldiers recruited in the coastal regions, a specially organized Egyptian force approaching from another direction, or a combination of imperial and local units. Their name has inspired several interpretations, but no single explanation has won complete agreement. What matters tactically is that they reach the battlefield from outside the main line of march, and attack at a moment when the Hittite chariots are dispersed around the Egyptian camp. Their arrival changes the geometry of the fight. Until this point, the Hittites have driven northward into the camp while the Egyptians struggle to form a centre. The Nearin strike from a direction the attackers may not have expected, possibly from the west or northwest after approaching through Amuru. Hittite crews who believe themselves inside a collapsing enemy position now face fresh troops on their flank or rear. The camp is no longer an isolated island. A new Egyptian-aligned force has reached it. The Nearin do not need to destroy the entire Hittite chariot arm. Their presence forces the attackers to divide attention. Vehicles that continue pressing toward Ramesses risk being cut off. Those attempting to withdraw must pass through fighting near the broken perimeter. Egyptian soldiers inside the camp gain confidence as the pressure eases. What had seemed like an irreversible collapse becomes a contested struggle, with reinforcements arriving from beyond the dust. This moment is strangely understated compared with the image of Ramesses alone. Royal monuments include the Nearin because their arrival is too important to omit, yet their role is kept subordinate to the king's heroism. They appear as timely supporters rather than the central reason the camp survives. The contradiction is revealing. The official narrative wants absolute royal isolation, but the visual and textual record preserves evidence of collective rescue. Farther south, the division of Ptah is also moving toward the battlefield. Messengers sent after the interrogation of the Hittite scouts urge it forward. Ptah may not arrive in time to participate fully in the initial recovery of the camp, but its approach matters even before its soldiers appear. Muwatalli cannot assume that the Egyptian force before him is the whole army. Additional divisions remain on the road, and committing all Hittite infantry across the river could expose his own troops to a fresh formation arriving in battle order. This may help explain why the Hittite king does not send the full weight of his infantry into the Egyptian camp. From the Egyptian perspective, his hesitation is an extraordinary missed opportunity. Ramesses' leading divisions are disordered, the royal enclosure is breached, and the pharaoh is vulnerable. A strong infantry advance might have converted the chariot breakthrough into total destruction, yet Muwatalli must judge the battle from behind Kadesh, through dust, delayed reports, and uncertain knowledge of the remaining Egyptian formations. Moving infantry across the river also takes time. Thousands of men cannot pass quickly through limited crossings while maintaining order. The city and watercourses that concealed the ambush now complicate reinforcement. Muwatalli may be protecting Kadesh itself, guarding against an Egyptian movement elsewhere, or preserving a reserve in case Tar and Set arrive from the south. He may believe the chariots have already achieved enough and require only time to complete the route. No single explanation fully accounts for his restraint. Later writers often portray it as the decisive Hittite error, but that judgment benefits from hindsight and from a battlefield reconstruction built mostly from Egyptian sources. Muwatalli does not see Ramesses' future monuments. He sees a confused engagement in which his chariots have broken 2 Egyptian formations, but have not yet returned in good order. Committing the entire army into that confusion may appear as dangerous as holding it back. The Hittite chariot crews begin withdrawing from the camp under growing pressure. Egyptian reliefs depict them driven toward the Orontes, with men and horses falling into the water. These scenes exaggerate order and scale, arranging defeat into a visual pattern around the dominant figure of Ramesses. Yet some retreat toward the river is likely. Chariots that have lost room to maneuver inside the camp need open ground, and the route back toward Muwatalli lies across or around the water. Egyptian counterattacks follow. Ramesses and the troops around him push outward rather than remaining behind the shattered perimeter. The purpose is not yet to seize Kadesh, but to prevent the Hittite chariots from reforming and attacking again. Archers target retreating crews. Chariots pursue where the ground allows. Infantry recover equipment and re-establish control over the camp. This struggle remains violent and uncertain, but the immediate threat to the pharaoh begins to recede. When Tar finally comes closer, the possibility of complete Egyptian destruction disappears. Muwatalli can no longer isolate Amun and the remnants of Re without confronting fresh troops. The division of Set remains too distant to shape the central action, but the Egyptian army is no longer reduced to one trapped formation. The window for a decisive Hittite victory has narrowed and then closed. Ramesses survives because several things happen together. His guards and remaining troops resist instead of dissolving. The Hittite chariots lose cohesion inside the camp. Some attackers become distracted or separated. Egyptian counterattacks exploit their reduced mobility. The Nearin arrive at the critical moment. Tar approaches from the south. Muwatalli does not, or cannot, commit the full force needed to finish the destruction. None of these factors alone explains the outcome. Together they turn catastrophe into recovery. The Egyptian army has not emerged unbroken, and the battlefield has not become the effortless triumph later carved on temple walls. Re has been mauled, the royal camp penetrated, and the campaign's command exposed. Yet the pharaoh remains alive, his forces are gathering, and the Hittite strike has spent its greatest energy without achieving the one result that would have changed everything. By the end of the crisis, Ramesses still stands near Kadesh. That fact will become the foundation of victory in memory, on the ground. It means only that Egypt has survived the day's most dangerous hours and that neither empire has yet gained the clean conclusion it came to claim. The battle does not end with one army standing alone over an empty field. It ends in exhaustion, separation, and competing claims. Ramesses has survived the ambush, recovered control of his camp, and prevented the Hittite chariot attack from becoming the destruction of his army. Muwatalli has failed to kill or capture the Egyptian king, yet he still holds Kadesh and retains the coalition gathered around it. Neither ruler receives the decisive conclusion he sought. The difference is that Ramesses will return home with the means to make the outcome look decisive. The fighting may continue beyond the first violent clash, though the surviving accounts compress and rearrange events around the pharaoh's heroism. Egyptian texts describe renewed engagements and repeated charges, with Ramesses driving enemies toward the river and forcing the Hittite king to seek peace. These scenes complete the royal pattern established earlier. Deception leads to isolation. Isolation reveals divine favor, and divine favor produces submission. Yet the practical condition of the armies suggests something less complete. The Egyptians are recovering from severe disruption. The Hittite chariot force has suffered losses but is not annihilated. Muwatalli's main body remains protected near Kadesh. A prolonged assault against the fortified city would require time, supplies, concentration, and confidence that Ramesses no longer possesses. Kadesh itself does not fall. That fact matters more strategically than any number of enemies shown drowning in temple reliefs. Ramesses has marched north to reassert Egyptian influence, punish opposition, secure Amuru, and challenge Hittite control over the Upper Orontes. The city at the center of those ambitions remains outside his grasp. He cannot present its ruler in chains, install a permanent Egyptian garrison, or use its walls as proof that the northern frontier has been transformed. Whatever tactical recovery the Egyptians achieve, the campaign's central objective remains unfulfilled. The distinction between tactical and strategic success is essential. Tactically, Ramesses avoids disaster. His forces rally after a devastating surprise attack, inflict damage on the Hittite chariots, and preserve the king, the royal camp, and enough of the army to withdraw in order. Given the vulnerability of his position, this is a real achievement. An army whose leading formations have been broken can easily disintegrate, especially when its commander is threatened. Ramesses' ability to remain visible, organize resistance, and hold the force together should not be dismissed merely because later propaganda magnifies it. Strategically, however, survival is not conquest. The Hittites continue to dominate Kadesh and maintain influence across much of northern Syria. Egypt does not establish the stable control Ramesses sought. The frontier remains contested, and the pharaoh will have to campaign again in later years. A victory that requires repeated efforts to recover the same territory is not the final settlement proclaimed in stone. The Egyptian army's condition also limits what Ramesses can attempt after the crisis. Re has been badly damaged. Amun has fought inside its own camp. Horses are exhausted, chariots damaged, supplies disturbed, and command relationships strained. Men who have spent hours regrouping after surprise cannot immediately be treated as a fresh siege force. Tar may arrive with greater cohesion, but combining the divisions into an effective assault near an intact enemy army is another matter. The pharaoh must calculate not only what can be gained by staying, but what might still be lost. Muwatalli faces his own constraints. His initial plan has produced a remarkable breakthrough, but not the decisive capture he may have expected. Chariot crews have been killed, scattered, or driven back. The Egyptian army is now concentrated more effectively than before. Fresh divisions are approaching, and Ramesses' forces are alert. renewing the assault risks meeting prepared troops rather than an exposed marching column. The Hittite king can preserve the strategic result simply by holding his position. He does not need to chase Ramesses all the way to Egypt. He needs to ensure that Kadesh remains secure and that the surrounding rulers continue to regard Hatti as the dominant northern power. Some form of pause, negotiation, or mutual disengagement therefore becomes plausible. Egyptian inscriptions portray Muwatalli as sending a message that acknowledges Ramesses' unmatched strength and requests an end to fighting. The language belongs to royal triumph, and there is no surviving Hittite account confirming that the king humbled himself in those terms. A practical exchange between commanders is still possible. Ancient armies often negotiate truces, recover wounded men, arrange withdrawals, or halt fighting when neither side can gain more without unacceptable risk. What is doubtful is not communication itself, but the submissive form preserved by Ramesses' scribes. The pharaoh can accept disengagement without calling it retreat. His army remains intact enough to march south, and his personal survival can be presented as proof that the gods have judged the contest in his favour. He does not need to explain the abandoned objective in operational language. The royal narrative changes the standard by which victory is measured. Kadesh no longer has to be captured. The king's triumph consists in standing alone against a hidden coalition and emerging unconquered. This transformation begins before the army reaches Egypt. Scribes, officers, and royal officials must organize what has happened into a report capable of supporting kingship. Battles are not remembered automatically. Details are selected, arranged, and repeated. Some events are enlarged, others are reduced or omitted. The false intelligence receives emphasis because it explains the surprise. The failure of officers is highlighted because it isolates the king. The arrival of supporting troops is acknowledged but subordinated. The continued Hittite possession of Kadesh receives little space because it does not serve the intended meaning. The resulting account does not function as a simple fabrication. It preserves real features of the battle, the concealed Hittite army, the false report, the separation of the Egyptian divisions, the attack on Re, the penetration of the camp, and the danger surrounding Ramesses. Its power comes from arranging genuine crisis around a royal conclusion. The more severe the disaster appears, the more extraordinary the king's recovery becomes. Failure is not erased so much as absorbed into a larger claim of divine and personal superiority. This helps explain why Ramesses commemorates Kadesh more extensively than many less ambiguous successes. A straightforward victory requires only the familiar image of a king defeating enemies. Kadesh offers drama, betrayal, abandonment, prayer, rescue, and reversal. It gives the pharaoh a story in which he is not merely victorious but indispensable. Without Ramesses, the army collapses. With him, chaos turns back toward order. The battle's strategic ambiguity makes it more useful, not less, because narrative can occupy the space left by an inconclusive result. The ordinary military consequences remain harder to conceal from neighboring states. Syrian rulers do not judge the outcome from temple walls in Egypt. They judge it from who controls roads, cities, and garrisons after the armies depart. Kadesh remains under Hittite authority. Amurru's position becomes precarious. The balance of influence does not shift decisively in Egypt's favour. To those living near the battlefield, the meaning of the encounter is likely very different from the message later displayed at Luxor or Abu Simbel. Ramesses nevertheless gains something substantial. He returns as a king who has faced a crisis without losing his army, throne, or public authority. The failure to capture Kadesh does not trigger visible collapse within Egypt. Instead, the pharaoh's prestige grows through the telling of the battle. His regime demonstrates an ability that matters almost as much as battlefield success, the ability to define what success means. The losses suffered by the Egyptian army disappear behind that definition. No full casualty list survives. No official inscription lingers over broken units or the families of men who do not return. Royal history records the restoration of order, not the private cost required to produce it. The dead become part of the unspoken foundation beneath the king's monumental survival. As Ramesses withdraws from the region, Kadesh remains on the horizon behind him, unconquered and still politically tied to Hatti. The city is the clearest measure of what the campaign failed to accomplish. Yet in the story travelling south with the pharaoh, the walls already matter less than the moment when he stood surrounded. The battlefield has denied Ramesses the victory he planned. Memory is about to give him a greater one. Beyond Egypt, the battle does not become the story Ramesses tells. Hittite archives do not preserve a matching heroic account of Muwatalli standing before the gods, outwitting the pharaoh, and saving Syria through personal courage. No surviving Hittite text narrates the day at Kadesh with the same dramatic completeness as the Egyptian poem, bulletin, and temple reliefs. This absence creates one of the battle's deepest asymmetries. Egypt leaves behind an overwhelming voice. Hatti leaves consequences. The silence should not be mistaken for proof that the Hittites regarded the battle as unimportant. Ancient archives survive unevenly. Tablets break, buildings burn, collections remain unexcavated, and documents written for immediate administration are discarded while monumental inscriptions endure. The Hittite capital at Hattusa has yielded thousands of clay tablets covering treaties, rituals, royal decrees, diplomacy, and political disputes. But the record is still incomplete. A detailed account of Kadesh may never have been written in the Egyptian manner, or it may have existed and disappeared with the collapse of the Hittite state. What remains does not allow Muwatalli to speak directly across the centuries about the battlefield. His position can instead be inferred from what happens afterward. Kadesh remains within the Hittite sphere. Egypt does not occupy the city. The surrounding balance of power does not swing decisively toward Ramesses. Amurru, whose return to Egyptian allegiance had helped provoke the conflict, is brought back under Hittite control. These developments are difficult to reconcile with the image of a completely defeated Hittite king begging the pharaoh for mercy. They suggest that Muwatalli emerges from the campaign with the strategic structure of his southern empire largely preserved. To local rulers, that may be the only verdict that matters. A king of a Syrian city does not need to decide who showed greater courage in a moment of battlefield chaos. He needs to know which empire can enforce treaties, support allies, punish defection, and maintain troops in the region. Ramesses withdraws south. Muwatalli remains connected to the political network around Kadesh. The city still stands under Hittite protection. From the frontier perspective, this looks less like Egyptian victory than Hittite resilience. The immediate fate of Amurru is especially revealing. Its ruler, Bentashina, had shifted allegiance toward Egypt, exposing a weakness in Hittite control and inviting Ramesses deeper into the region. After Kadesh, Muwatalli removes him and installs a more reliable ruler. Bentashina is taken into Hittite custody, rather than displayed as an Egyptian ally protected by Ramesses. Later, under different political circumstances, he will be restored, but the sequence demonstrates who possesses the power to reorganize the kingdom after the battle. The Hittites can still discipline the frontier. This does not mean Muwatalli wins a flawless triumph. His plan comes close to destroying the Egyptian army but fails to complete the task. His chariot force suffers losses, his coalition does not capture Ramesses, and the pharaoh is able to leave the battlefield with enough strength to preserve his authority. If Muwatalli intended to eliminate Egypt as a rival in Syria, he fails. If he intended to defend Kadesh, punish Amuru, and stop the Egyptian advance, he succeeds more clearly. The difference lies in the scale of judgment. Ramesses' monuments focus tightly on the crisis around the royal camp. At that scale, the recovery can look like victory. The Hittite political outcome becomes visible only when the lens widens to months and years. Territory, treaties, and vassal behavior reveal a result less favorable to Egypt. The battle, therefore, produces two truths that do not fit comfortably together. Ramesses wins the struggle to survive the ambush, while Muwatalli preserves the strategic order the campaign was meant to break. Later, Egyptian operations reinforce this ambiguity. Ramesses campaigns north again, attacking towns and reasserting Egyptian power in parts of the Levant. These later expeditions are sometimes treated as proof that Kadesh did not end the contest. They are also evidence that the fifth-year campaign failed to settle it. A truly decisive conquest would not require repeated efforts to restore authority over the same disputed zone. The Hittites face pressure elsewhere as well. Muwatalli's empire is not free to concentrate permanently on Egypt. Internal political concerns, tensions in Anatolia, and the growing power of Assyria complicate Hittite strategy. Muwatalli has moved the royal centre southward to Tahuntasa, perhaps partly to respond more effectively to the Syrian frontier, though the full reasons remain debated. His decisions generate tension within the royal family and administration. After his death, succession disputes will weaken the unity of the Hittite court. These wider problems help explain why Hatti eventually chooses diplomacy with Egypt. The peace that comes years later is not simply the delayed surrender of one side. It is a practical response to a changing international environment. Assyria is expanding in Mesopotamia and threatening interests that matter deeply to the Hittites. Egypt and Hatti can continue fighting over Syria, or they can stabilize the frontier and face other dangers with fewer resources tied down in mutual conflict. From this perspective, Kadesh is not the final duel between two kings. It is one violent episode inside a diplomatic system that continues to change after the chariots withdraw. Muwatalli dies before the famous peace treaty is concluded. His son Urhi-Teshub, who rules as Mursili III, is displaced by Muwatalli's brother Hattusili III. The resulting legitimacy problem shapes Hittite diplomacy. Hattusili needs recognition from other great kings, especially because his path to the throne can be portrayed as usurpation. A formal agreement with Ramesses offers security abroad and prestige at home. The Hittite view of Egypt also appears in later correspondence. The two courts negotiate as major powers, exchange royal letters, and eventually arrange dynastic marriage. This is not how a permanently humbled state behaves toward an unquestioned conqueror. Hittite rulers address Ramesses within the diplomatic language of brotherhood used among great kings. They bargain, complain, request, resist, and seek advantage. Egypt does the same. The relationship after Kadesh is competitive, cautious, and increasingly pragmatic. The absence of a Hittite battle epic may also reflect a different tradition of royal representation. Hittite kings certainly commemorate campaigns and divine favour, but their surviving political texts often operate through annals, treaties, prayers, and legal claims rather than the vast integrated spectacle seen in Ramesses' Egyptian monuments. Muwatalli does not possess the same stone canvas along the Nile, where temple walls, pylons, courtyards, and sacred routes can repeat a single event before enormous audiences. Egypt's landscape and religious institutions give Ramesses extraordinary opportunities to monumentalize memory. Clay tablets serve a different life. They can preserve detailed diplomacy but remain inside archives. Monumental reliefs confront viewers publicly and repeatedly. One medium supports administration and negotiation. The other can dominate cultural memory for millennia. The result is not that Egypt owns more truth, but that Egypt owns more visibility. That visibility has shaped modern understanding for centuries. Kadesh has been approached through Ramesses' version because his version survives so spectacularly. The pharaoh appears enormous, dynamic, and unmistakable. Muwatalli is distant, hidden, and often reduced to the ruler who waits while his troops are defeated. The visual imbalance encourages a moral one. Ramesses looks active, Muwatalli looks passive, yet concealment and reserve are not the same as cowardice. The Hittite king's plan creates the most dangerous moment of the battle, and his continued control of Kadesh reveals that he is not driven from the field in the way Egyptian art suggests. The Hittite side of the story must therefore be reconstructed from indirect evidence: the city not captured, the vassal punished, the frontier retained, the later campaigns required, and the eventual treaty negotiated between equals. None of these details proves that Muwatalli considered Kadesh a glorious victory. They do show that Ramesses' triumphal version cannot stand alone as the battle's final meaning. For the people living in Hittite territory, news of the encounter may have arrived through royal messengers, returning soldiers, local officials, and the visible fact that Egyptian occupation did not follow. Their memory of the day may have centered not on Ramesses' prayer to Amun, but on the success of the ambush, the losses among chariot crews, or the continued security of the city. Those memories have largely vanished because they were not carved across the temples of a long-lived monumental civilization. Silence has therefore become part of the mystery. The Hittites do not answer Ramesses line by line. They leave no rival wall declaring that Egypt was deceived, broken, and driven away. Instead, the political map answers for them. Ramesses carries home the more powerful story. Muwatalli keeps the city. Ramesses does not leave the meaning of Kadesh on the battlefield. He carries it back to Egypt, where stone, ritual, writing, and repetition begin the slower work of turning survival into victory. The city remains beyond Egyptian control. The Hittite frontier remains intact, and the army's early collapse cannot be entirely concealed. Yet the pharaoh possesses something Muwatalli does not: an immense sacred landscape on which one version of the battle can be made permanent. Across several of Egypt's most important temples, Kadesh appears again and again. Reliefs and inscriptions are placed at Luxor, Karnak, the Ramesseum, Abydos, and Abu Simbel, adapting the story to different architectural settings while preserving its central message. This repetition is extraordinary. Ramesses commemorates many military actions, but Kadesh receives a scale and narrative complexity that far exceed the clarity of its strategic result. The battle becomes not merely one campaign among others, but the defining demonstration of his royal nature. Temple walls are ideal instruments for this transformation because they do not function like neutral public archives. A temple is sacred space, a place where divine order is renewed and the king's relationship with the gods is displayed. By placing Kadesh within such a setting, Ramesses turns military memory into theology. The battle is no longer only about Egypt and Hatti. It becomes an encounter between order and chaos, between the ruler chosen by the gods and a mass of foreign enemies whose numbers make his triumph more meaningful. The visual program guides the viewer through the crisis. The Egyptian camp appears as an organized rectangle filled with small scenes of preparation, confusion, animals, soldiers, and equipment. The city of Kadesh rises beside the river, often shown in a compressed form that combines map, symbol, and narrative setting. Hittite chariots surge toward the Egyptians. Men tumble into the water. Foreign princes are identified by captions. The pharaoh dominates everything. Ramesses is shown far larger than the soldiers around him, standing or driving in his chariot with bow drawn. His horses stretch forward in controlled motion, while the enemy collapses beneath and around him. The scale is not intended as physical realism. It expresses rank and cosmic importance. The king is enormous because he is the decisive force in the event. The army, city, river, and enemy coalition become elements arranged around the revelation of his power. At Abu Simbel, the message is especially forceful. Visitors approaching the great temple already confront colossal seated figures of Ramesses carved into the cliff. Inside, images of Kadesh continue the claim made by those statues: this king exceeds ordinary human scale. The battle scenes use vivid detail to create an impression of witnessed history, yet every detail is controlled. Movement, geography, and specific names make the account feel concrete. The arrangement ensures that the conclusion remains unmistakable. Ramesses stands at the center, restoring order through his own strength and divine relationship. Words reinforce what the images declare. The Kadesh narrative survives in several interconnected forms commonly called the poem, the bulletin, and the captions attached to individual scenes. Their modern names can make them sound like separate documents produced for different purposes, but on the monuments they function together. The bulletin gives a more compact account of the campaign and surprise attack. The poem expands the drama of isolation, prayer, divine response, and royal counterattack. Captions identify participants, explain actions, and direct interpretation of the images. These accounts do not agree perfectly in every detail. Their emphasis, sequences, and descriptions sometimes diverge. One version may stress the king's abandonment more strongly, while another preserves the presence of forces near him. Rather than treating these differences as evidence that one account is truthful and another simply false, scholars increasingly examine how ancient audiences could accept multiple versions serving the same royal meaning. Exact consistency is less important than the shared conclusion the pharaoh faced a hidden coalition, overcame betrayal and failed support, and revealed himself as the uniquely effective defender of Egypt. The contradictions are useful because they allow different aspects of kingship to emerge. Ramesses can be both isolated and surrounded by loyal guards. He can be deceived without appearing foolish because the deception proves the enemy's fear and dishonesty. His army can fail without weakening Egypt permanently because the king restores it. The Hittites can break into his camp while still being portrayed as ultimately powerless. Each version adjusts the balance, but all roads lead back to royal superiority. The story also places responsibility carefully. Egyptian commanders and troops are criticized for failing to discover the enemy and for abandoning the king during the crisis. Their failure heightens Ramesses' achievement, but it does not become a permanent accusation against the entire military system. Once the pharaoh rallies the resistance, order returns. The message is not that Egypt's army is worthless. It is that Egypt's army requires the king at its center. Amun occupies the other essential position in the narrative. Ramesses calls upon the god when human assistance appears to vanish. He reminds Amun of temples built, offerings made, and devotion demonstrated. The relationship resembles an exchange of sacred obligation. The king has honored the god, and the god now answers the king. Divine power flows through Ramesses, allowing him to defeat enemies whose numbers would overwhelm an ordinary man. This prayer transforms the battle from a military accident into proof of cosmic legitimacy. Ramesses does not survive because the Hittite chariots lose cohesion, because his guards resist, because the Nerin arrive, or because Ptah approaches. Those factors remain visible at the edges of the narrative, but the central explanation is divine recognition. Amun saves Ramesses because Ramesses is the correct ruler. The outcome therefore validates not only his courage but the entire sacred order of his reign. The account travels beyond temple walls. Papyrus copies of the Kadesh composition show that the story also circulates within scribal culture. It can be copied, studied, and preserved as literature rather than remaining fixed to a single monument. Papyrus Salia III, written long after the battle, demonstrates that the narrative continues to attract attention within schools or scholarly environments. Kadesh becomes a model of elevated language, royal courage, and dramatic composition. This literary survival matters. Monumental reliefs address people moving through sacred architecture, while papyrus allows the words to enter a different world of copying and education. Scribes encounter the battle not as a raw record awaiting judgment, but as a polished royal text. Repetition trains memory. The more often the story is copied, carved, and recited, the less visible its original uncertainty becomes. Ramesses' long reign gives this process time to mature. He rules for decades after Kadesh, building on a scale that spreads his name across Egypt and Nubia. A shorter reign might have left the battle as one awkward episode. Ramesses has the resources and longevity to make it foundational. Each new monument adds authority to the earlier monuments. Each colossal image supports the story told beside it. The mature king's later prestige flows backward, making the young commander at Kadesh appear destined for greatness. It would be too simple to describe this entire program as a lie. The monuments preserve genuine fear, surprise, military breakdown, and recovery. They admit that Ramesses was deceived and that his army suffered serious disorder. Pure invention would have been easier and less embarrassing. Instead, the inscriptions take a dangerous and ambiguous event and reorganize it around the values Egyptian kingship needed to express. The result is more durable than any battlefield report could have been. Strategic outcomes fade as frontiers change. Kadesh itself passes through later empires and eventually becomes an archaeological mound. The Hittite kingdom disappears during the upheavals at the end of the Bronze Age, but Ramesses' images remain on stone walls in a land where monumental architecture survives with unusual power. Long after the political map that produced the battle is forgotten, viewers can still see the pharaoh charging. They can still read that he stood alone. They can still watch the Hittites fall into the Orontes beneath his horses. The city Ramesses failed to capture becomes almost incidental. In stone, he has captured the battle itself. The monuments make Kadesh look final, but history refuses to stop where the walls end. Ramesses and the Hittites remain rivals for years after the battle, and the frontier continues to shift under the pressure of campaigns, rebellions, diplomacy, and changing rulers. No single day at Kadesh settles the question of who will dominate Syria. Instead, both empires are drawn into a longer contest that gradually reveals something the reliefs cannot admit. Neither side can impose a permanent solution at acceptable cost. Ramesses campaigns again in the Levant. Later inscriptions celebrate attacks on fortified towns, the capture of settlements, and renewed Egyptian authority in regions north of the most secure frontier. These operations demonstrate that Egypt still possesses military reach. They also reveal that Kadesh failed to create lasting control. Territory must be revisited because allegiance remains unstable. Garrisons, local rulers, and diplomatic promises can shift once a royal army withdraws. The pharaoh may defeat resistance in one season, yet the political structure of northern Syria continues to favor Hittite influence. The Hittites face a similar problem. Holding Kadesh does not remove Egypt from the region. Ramesses remains wealthy, powerful, and capable of sending armies north. Egyptian influence along the coast and in southern Canaan remains secure. The Hittite king cannot simply destroy that system without committing enormous resources far from Anatolia. Each empire can threaten the other's frontier, but neither can easily conquer the other's heartland. This balance encourages repeated displays of strength without a decisive transformation of the map. The contest becomes expensive. Armies require grain, horses, equipment, transport, and years of preparation. Vassal kingdoms must be watched and rewarded. Local rulers learn to negotiate between the great powers, sometimes promising loyalty to whichever side appears closest. War can punish defection, but it can also create new opportunities for defection by exhausting the empire trying to enforce obedience. Then the Hittite court enters a period of internal instability. Muwatalli II dies, and his son Urhi-Teshub succeeds him under the royal name Mursili III. His rule does not last. Muwatalli's brother Hattusili challenges him, wins the struggle, and takes the throne as Hattusili III. The exact moral and legal arguments surrounding this transfer are preserved through Hittite texts, written to justify Hattusili's actions, but the political result is clear. A ruler whose path to power is disputed must strengthen his legitimacy both at home and abroad. Recognition from Egypt becomes valuable. Ramesses is not merely a former battlefield opponent. He is one of the major kings of the international system, and a formal relationship with him can help stabilize Hattusili's position. At the same time, Egypt has reasons to prefer agreement. Ramesses has already shown that he can survive Hittite resistance but not easily remove it. A fixed frontier offers more security than endless campaigns against fortified cities and shifting allies. The wider world is also changing. Assyria is rising as an increasingly powerful force in Mesopotamia, threatening the balance that has allowed Hatti to dominate much of northern Syria. The Hittites cannot ignore a strong eastern rival, while continuing to devote men and resources to conflict with Egypt. Ramesses, for his part, benefits from a northern frontier that no longer demands constant intervention. Peace can preserve Egyptian prestige without requiring the conquest of Kadesh. Around 2 decades after the battle, in the 21st regnal year of Ramesses, Egypt and Hatti conclude a formal treaty. Modern descriptions often call it the first peace treaty in history, though that phrase requires caution. Earlier treaties certainly existed, and the Kadesh Agreement is better understood as one of the earliest surviving international peace treaties, known in substantial parallel versions. What makes it remarkable is not absolute chronological priority, but the preservation of both Egyptian and Hittite formulations of the same diplomatic settlement. The Hittite version is written in Akkadian on clay tablets, the diplomatic language used between major courts of the Late Bronze Age. The Egyptian version is translated into hieroglyphic inscriptions and displayed on temple walls. The two texts do not mirror each other word for word, but they preserve the same essential agreement. The rulers establish peace, promise non-aggression, affirm mutual support, and recognize an enduring relationship between their kingdoms. There is no admission that one side has surrendered. Ramesses does not declare that he is returning Kadesh because he never acknowledges losing it in the first place. Hattusili does not accept the role of defeated subordinate. The treaty is framed between great kings. Its language belongs to reciprocity, dynastic legitimacy, and practical security rather than conquest. The agreement includes provisions for mutual assistance if either ruler faces external attack or internal rebellion. It also addresses fugitives, requiring that people who flee from one kingdom to the other be returned. Significantly, the text offers assurances that returned fugitives and their families will not be subjected to severe retaliation. The exact application of such clauses remains uncertain, but their inclusion shows how detailed interstate agreements could become. The treaty is not merely a promise to stop fighting. It creates procedures for managing political danger across borders. The gods of both lands are invoked as witnesses. This gives the document sacred force. A treaty in the ancient Near East is not simply a secular contract between administrations. Divine powers guarantee the agreement and threaten consequences for violation. The gods of Egypt and Hatti stand together within the diplomatic text, supervising a peace made by rulers who once presented each other as enemies of cosmic order. This change does not require Ramesses to revise the story of Kadesh. He can preserve the battle as a personal triumph and still embrace the Hittites as diplomatic partners. Ancient royal ideology tolerates this apparent contradiction because the two messages serve different moments. The reliefs prove that Ramesses cannot be defeated. The treaty proves that another great king recognizes his status. Peace does not erase victory, it becomes another form of it. Hattusili gains recognition and security. Ramesses gains stability and prestige. The frontier becomes less dangerous, and the long struggle over Syria enters a more controlled phase. Neither ruler receives everything his predecessors once sought. Egypt does not restore the deepest extent of its earlier northern empire. Hatti does not remove Egyptian influence from the southern Levant. The treaty succeeds precisely because it accepts limits that military propaganda refuses to name. Diplomatic exchange grows after the agreement. Letters move between the royal courts. Gifts, medical requests, complaints, and ceremonial language reveal a relationship managed through negotiation rather than chariot warfare. Queens participate in correspondence, especially Hattusili's powerful wife Puduhepa, whose role in Hittite diplomacy is unusually visible. The courts address one another as members of a family of great kings, using the language of brotherhood to express formal equality. Eventually, Ramesses marries a Hittite princess. She comes to Egypt with a large ceremonial escort and receives an Egyptian name. The marriage is advertised as proof that the foreign ruler has entrusted his daughter to the pharaoh, allowing Ramesses to present diplomacy within the same hierarchy that shapes his battle scenes. Hittite correspondence, however, reveals prolonged negotiations over status, gifts, and arrangements. What Egyptian monuments compress into effortless submission is actually the product of careful bargaining between courts. A second Hittite princess may later enter the Egyptian royal household, though the details are less certain. The broader pattern is unmistakable. The two dynasties bind themselves through kinship after decades of conflict. The enemy hidden behind Kadesh becomes a royal in-law. This peace lasts. It survives the personal ambitions that produced the battle and helps stabilize relations until the larger systems of the late Bronze Age begin to fracture. Within a few generations, Hatti will disappear as an imperial power amid invasions, internal breakdown, famine, and wider regional collapse. Egypt will survive but face its own pressures. The treaty cannot prevent that changing world, yet it demonstrates that the great powers understood cooperation before catastrophe forced it upon them. Kadesh therefore leads not to the permanent triumph carved in Egypt, but to recognition of mutual endurance. Ramesses cannot remove the Hittites. The Hittites cannot drive Egypt from the international system. Their most durable achievement emerges only after both sides accept what the battlefield revealed. Neither empire can win the future alone. The peace treaty does not erase Kadesh. It makes the battle even more revealing. Ramesses eventually accepts a diplomatic relationship with the same empire his monuments portray as utterly broken before him, while the Hittites negotiate as equals rather than defeated subjects. The contradiction survives because Kadesh has ceased to function as a simple account of territory gained or enemies destroyed. It has become a lesson in how power remembers itself. On the battlefield, the outcome is layered. Muwatalli chooses the ground, conceals his army, manipulates Egyptian intelligence, and launches a devastating attack against an exposed division. His chariots break penetrate the royal camp, and place the Egyptian command in genuine danger. Ramesses fails to capture Kadesh and withdraws without permanently altering the strategic balance in northern Syria. Measured by the campaign's original objectives, Egypt does not achieve a decisive victory. Yet Muwatalli also fails to complete what may have been one of the most effective ambushes of the Late Bronze Age. Ramesses is neither killed nor captured. The Egyptian army does not collapse beyond recovery. The Hittite chariot force loses cohesion, the defenders rally, additional troops arrive, and the opportunity for total destruction passes. Measured against the disaster that nearly unfolds, the Egyptian recovery is remarkable. This is why attempts to assign a single modern label to the battle often feel inadequate. Calling Kadesh an Egyptian victory repeats the conclusion Ramesses wanted preserved. Calling it simply a Hittite victory overlooks the failure to destroy an enemy caught in an extraordinarily vulnerable position. Calling it a draw captures the lack of decisive territorial change but can flatten the dramatic imbalance of the fighting itself. The encounter contains elements of Hittite tactical brilliance, Egyptian operational failure, royal courage, collective resistance, strategic Hittite success, and eventual military stalemate. Scholars still debate how these elements should be weighted because the surviving evidence does not offer a neutral battlefield account. The Egyptian sources are detailed but purposeful. The Hittite evidence is politically informative but narratively sparse. Geography helps reconstruct movement, yet the precise river crossings, camp location, and timing remain uncertain. Numbers are preserved through texts that enlarge the scale of opposition to magnify the king. Even the identity of the Nearan, whose arrival may have been crucial, remains unresolved. The uncertainty does not make the story unknowable. It changes the kind of knowledge available. The broad sequence is clear enough. Ramesses advances with divided forces, accepts false intelligence, establishes camp near Kadesh, learns the Hittites are close, and fails to warn Re before the chariot assault strikes. Re is disrupted. The Egyptian camp is penetrated, and the pharaoh becomes the center of a desperate defense. Hittite momentum fades. Egyptian resistance strengthens. Reinforcements arrive, and the attack is driven back without Kadesh being taken. What cannot be recovered with the same confidence is the private experience of those hours. No ordinary Egyptian soldier leaves a memoir describing the moment the road filled with chariots. No Hittite driver records whether he entered the royal camp believing Ramesses had already fled. No member of the bodyguard explains how close the attackers came to the king. The monuments show carefully selected gestures, not fear, confusion, or uncertainty as individuals experienced them. Royal history absorbs those individuals. The soldiers of Re become the division that broke. The guards become almost invisible beside the pharaoh. The Nearin become timely supporting figures. Hittite warriors become a mass of defeated foreigners. Muwatalli becomes the distant king who hides rather than fights. Thousands of separate decisions are compressed into a single image of Ramesses drawing his bow. That image is not merely decoration. It teaches viewers how kingship works. The pharaoh stands larger than the crisis because he embodies the order that survives it. His physical scale on the wall announces a political truth rather than an anatomical one. Officers can fail, troops can scatter, and enemies can exploit deception. But the ruler chosen by the gods restores the world to its correct arrangement. This is why Ramesses can admit so much danger. The surprise attack does not weaken his legend once the ending is controlled. It strengthens it. A king who wins an easy battle proves competence. A king who is abandoned, surrounded, and saved through his own relationship with Amun proves something approaching sacred necessity. The worse the crisis becomes in the telling, the more indispensable Ramesses appears. Modern audiences often describe this as propaganda, and the word is useful as long as it does not reduce the monuments to crude dishonesty. The Kadesh inscriptions do not simply replace failure with invented triumph. They preserve the failure inside a larger ideological structure. The exposed army, false intelligence, broken division, and invaded camp remain visible because they create the conditions for royal transformation. Ramesses does not erase what went wrong. He changes what it means. The battle also shows that military reputation can be separated from military objectives. Ramesses fails to capture the city, but succeeds in making his conduct near that city central to his identity. Kadesh becomes one of the most famous battles of the ancient world partly because Egypt does not win it cleanly. Ambiguity produces narrative. A straightforward conquest might have earned a few conventional reliefs. A near catastrophe offers suspense, reversal, theology, blame, rescue, and an unforgettable central figure. His long reign gives that narrative extraordinary reach. Ramesses outlives many of the soldiers, officers, and foreign rulers who knew the campaign firsthand. New generations grow up surrounded by his monuments. The younger commander who marched too far ahead of his army gradually disappears beneath the image of the mature King of Kings. Repetition hardens interpretation. What is carved at Karnak supports what is carved at Luxor. What appears at the Ramesseum reinforces what is shown at Abu Simbel. Papyrus copies carry the words beyond the walls. Muwatalli cannot compete with that afterlife. His political achievement is real but less visible. He keeps Kadesh, restores Hittite authority over Amuru, and prevents Egypt from overturning the northern balance. Yet strategic success leaves fewer dramatic images than a king charging through enemies. When Hatti later collapses, much of its imperial landscape disappears into ruins, buried tablets, and fragmented memory. Egypt's monuments remain standing above ground, continuing to speak in Ramesses' voice. The result is one of history's clearest demonstrations that memory does not automatically belong to the side that gains the most territory. It belongs to the side able to preserve the most persuasive form of meaning. Ramesses cannot command the final political outcome at Kadesh, but he can command scale, composition, repetition, and sacred space. He loses the city and captures the imagination. This does not make him a fraud. It makes him a ruler who understands that power exists in both events and their retelling. He survives a disaster, helps rally resistance, and returns with his authority intact. Those achievements are genuine. The transformation lies in expanding them until the distinction between survival and victory becomes almost impossible to see. Kadesh endures because both realities remain present. Behind the colossal pharaoh stands a young commander deceived by enemy intelligence. Behind the triumphant charge stands a shattered division and a breached camp. Behind the lone warrior stand guards, archers, chariot crews, scattered soldiers, and reinforcements. Behind the claim of conquest stands a city Ramesses never takes. History called it victory because Ramesses gave history the words, images, and walls with which to remember it. The battlefield itself offered a more difficult verdict. He was surrounded. He survived, and survival became greater than conquest once it was carved in stone. Long after the horses are gone and the dust has settled into the fields beside the Orontes, the walls continue to hold the motion of the battle. Ramesses still draws his bow, chariots still overturn beneath him, the river still receives the defeated, and the hidden Hittite army still emerges from behind Kadesh as though the ambush has only just begun. The real men who cross that landscape leave fainter traces. Their voices do not survive with the clarity of the kings. Most become nameless shapes within formations called Amun, Re, Ptah, and Set, or anonymous crews among the coalition of Hatti. Their fear, endurance, confusion, and discipline survive only indirectly, beneath the polished certainty of royal memory. Kadesh itself grows quiet. Empires that once struggled to possess it weaken and disappear. Hittite authority collapses. Egyptian power contracts. Roads change. Walls decay. And the city becomes layers beneath a mound. The place that once seemed important enough to draw two great armies gradually loses even its ancient name until archaeology begins to recover it. Ramesses endures differently. His statues remain seated before temples. His cartouches continue to mark stone. His version of Kadesh crosses thousands of years because he understood that memory requires a structure strong enough to carry it. Sometimes that structure is a temple wall. Sometimes it is a copied text. Sometimes it is a story so carefully shaped that later ages continue to repeat its conclusion even while questioning it. Yet beneath the victory, the uncertainty remains. It waits in the distance between the divisions, in the silence of the Hittite archives, in the identity of the Nearin, and in the narrow interval during which the fate of a king may have depended on guards and soldiers whose names are lost. Perhaps that is the final image Kadesh leaves behind, not a conquering pharaoh and not a defeated one, but a young ruler standing inside a collapsing plain, unable to control what has happened and already beginning to control how it will be remembered. The city remains beyond him. The enemy remains unbroken. Evening settles over the river, and the survivors gather among damaged chariots and torn tents. Victory has not yet been written. For a little while longer, there is only dust moving slowly across the ground, covering the tracks of both armies until the battlefield becomes silent enough for memory to begin.